Chapter 475. While the dark forest was once again experiencing a small uproar, Grimm was busy in his laboratory. Every time he finished tempering his mind, Grimm's mental space would slightly collapse. During this period of time, he would have to gorge himself to consume large amounts of energy in order to support his body and mind's rapid recovery. He could not help but be thankful for this. As he was in the dark forest, he would never have to worry about a lack of magical beasts. It was said that there was a saying among combat magi: only the magus who could eat the most could become the magus who could fight the best. From this saying, one could basically understand the attitude of magi towards eating and drinking. This was not because magi were gluttons who indulged in eating and drinking, but because of the fragility of the human body. Be it elemental magi or body-tempering magi, the human body was not a help to magi. Instead, it was a huge restriction. The higher the level of a magus, the more terrifying the torrent of elemental energy that the body had to endure when casting high-level spells. If Grimm did not transform his body into an elemental body in time after becoming a fire magus, then every time he cast a powerful fire element spell, it would cause substantial damage to his body. One could imagine the terrifying lava flowing through his blood vessels at a temperature of a few thousand degrees. If one did not have a strong body, their blood vessels and flesh would have been burnt to ashes before they could even activate these high-ranked spells. After the elemental transformation, the body would require even more energy to support it. The energy that an ordinary person's daily diet would not even be enough to support a magus casting the most insignificant of spells. That was why magi, as a high-energy lifeform, had to rely on a different diet to support the normal activities of their bodies. The so-called delicacies of human society, for magi, apart from having a taste, were not beneficial to their bodies at all. If magi wanted to grow stronger day by day, the magical energy meals made from the flesh of magical beasts would become a daily supplement for them. As it was adjacent to the dark forest, the blazing flame monarch naturally had a huge advantage in terms of magical beast resources. In the mission hall on the first floor of the wizard's pagoda, there were long-term missions to purchase the flesh of magical beasts hanging at the top of the mission board. In the rearing room of the wizard's pagoda, there were also some ordinary magical beasts with delicious meat. However, the flesh of these magical beasts was only available to the higher-ups of the wizard's pagoda, so the low-level magi apprentices had no chance of tasting it. As the blazing flame monarch's power increased, the number of magi apprentices within the wizard's pagoda increased. Apart from studying, experimenting, and practicing spells, their daily activities were also becoming more and more common. Magus 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 magi mag magoff magus head magus. Mag, the magus mag magus of magus. Magus of the name was, magus of mag to say. Of yang, magus of mags, the mag magoff, of to and dragon, mags magus to the magus. Perhaps no one could explain the bloodline relationship between them and the true fire dragon, but the trace of fire dragon's bloodline that permeated their bloodline was real. Because the earth fire dragons lived in the depths of volcanoes all year round, they loved to consume sulfur and fire energy cores, so their flesh was soaked in a thick fire elemental aura. Back then, in the elite apprentice camp in the dark crypt, Grimm had only eaten a single hellfire dragon rib, and his strength had skyrocketed. Now that he had become a wizard, the flesh of these magical creatures could no longer give him as much power as before. However, the fire dragon's ribs had a considerable effect on Grimm's body as he persistently swallowed them. If eating and drinking leisurely every day could allow one's body and spirit to grow by quite a bit, perhaps no magus would be able to resist such a blatant temptation. An adult earth fire dragon weighed 3,000 kilograms. After removing the unnecessary parts and organs, the total amount of ribs left was about 2,000 kilograms. After the AI chip had fully calculated the energy content of the fire dragon's ribs and Grimm's fire elemental power growth requirements, It had set a daily quota of 50 kilograms for Grim. 50 kilograms of ribs. If Grim was a regular human, he would not be able to eat such a terrifying amount even if he stuffed himself to death. However, this was only a small matter to Grim. Although Grim still had the appearance and breathing of a normal human, if he was thrown onto the operating table and dissected, he would find that all the internal organs and flesh tissues in his body were worlds apart from those of a human. This was something that could not be helped. Any human who became a magus would walk further and further down the path of mutation, until the day came when they could no longer turn back. Even people like Blitz had abandoned even the most basic of human thoughts. He left everyone in the dust on the path of insectoid transformation, swearing not to look back. Other than the fire dragon's ribs, Grim had also tried the flesh of a ground fire lizard. Unfortunately, the sour and fishy smell was comparable to a potion concocted by a potioneering acolyte. After trying it once, Grim had put it on the blacklist. Other than stuffing himself with food, what Grim did most of the day was soaking in a medicinal bath. Grim's spirit had stabilized at 8 points, which was almost the same as Wizard Kogan, who had advanced more than 100 years ago. They were both veteran magi. However, Grim was lagging behind in all other aspects of his body. This had something to do with the fact that he had only advanced for a short period of time. He had been busy running around ever since he became a magus, so he did not have the time to settle down and solidify his foundation. If he did not have so many auxiliary methods, he would not have been able to achieve his current result. Grim took advantage of this rare seclusion and began to train his body in all aspects. This so-called medicinal bath was actually a method used by low-ranked anatomy refinery sorcerers to strengthen their bodies. Using potions or poisons with rich energy, they could continuously stimulate the cells in the Magi's body, allowing them to achieve a dynamic balance between rapid death and recovery. This way, they could continuously stimulate their body's potential and fully tap into the power of their flesh. Of course, to use this method, they had to first solve the problem of their body weakening after training. This could be solved with the mana set meal. However, Grim was training his spirit and wizard potions at the same time, so the weakening of both his body and spirit was tormenting him a lot of times. As a magus, even if he stayed in his room most of the time, he could still use his powerful spiritual sense to grasp everything that was happening in the wizard's pagoda. When needed, he could even control the changes around the Black Forest like an extension of his arm. However, at this moment, as his body and spirit had fallen to the bottom, he could not release his spiritual sense, and his body was extremely weak. This feeling of weakness made him feel like he had been beaten back to his original state. As the leader of a faction, he could not let his enemies or subordinates see this weak side of him, or else it could easily lead to unpredictable events. That was why Grim had never left the 5th level of the wizard's pagoda. Even Gargamel, who was preparing the medicinal bath for him, had not seen him. Since his body and spirit were so weak that he could not see anyone, Grim closed the door and began to study some of the research projects that he had put aside for a long time. Over the past 2 days, the research project that he had been following up on was the strange insect that had found out about the spider's lair. Unlike the mutated insect queen, this strange insect that was still alive had its own unique survival abilities. If the mutated insect queen was seeking to live and prosper together with its host, then this strange insect was purely stealing and plundering. This strange insect had been taken from the Medusa's body, and it had been placed there by the old spider himself, hoping that it would break out of the body and become a powerful support for him. The strength of this strange insect was that it could steal the natural instincts of its host and turn them into nourishment for its growth. Even though the natural instincts that it had stolen could not restore 100% of its host's abilities, Grim was still shocked and moved. Since ancient times, a person's natural instincts were determined the moment they were born. Even though it was possible to optimize and improve them later on with a large number of rare resources, it was unimaginable to completely change one's natural instincts. After obtaining the strange insect, Grimm had flipped through many books and historical records, but he could not find any information on this insect. At least, in the books and ancient books that Grimm had read, he had never heard of any similar examples. This showed how valuable this strange insect's ability to steal the natural instincts of other living beings was. Thus, from the moment he obtained this strange insect, Grimm had set up a laboratory for it, authorizing the AI chip to test and cultivate it in all aspects. After a series of tests, Grimm obtained a result that was both good and bad. On one hand, he was happy that this strange insect could steal the natural instincts of its host. On the other hand, he was worried that the natural instincts it stole were fragmented and could not be pieced back together through experiment. Just like how the old spider had parasitized the Medusa's body, even the old spider did not know what kind of abilities the insect would obtain when it broke out of the body. It was impossible to completely absorb the Medusa's innate ability to petrify, but there was a chance that a weakened version of the paralyzing gaze could be formed. No sorcerer could explain how this strange witchcraft ability appeared. Chapter 476. Innate Plunder Insect. According to the AI chip's experimental data, this insect could only plunder once in its life, which was the moment it evolved from a larva to an adult. However, this plunder had its limit. 17% of the gene fragments was the upper limit of this insect's innate ability. If this limit was exceeded, the excessive amount of foreign gene fragments would cause the insect's genes to become unstable, which would lead to the collapse of the gene chain. This obviously could not achieve Grimm's goal of obtaining 100% of the target's gene chain. The Magus world was powerful and prosperous. Even Grimm himself did not believe that no Magus had ever discovered this strange ability of this insect. However, the Magus world had not developed a complete microscopic system, which meant that even the most powerful Magus in this world could only extend their magic to the molecular level. Further down, when sorcery research reached the atomic level, the high-grade sorcerers became helpless. This was actually a kind of inevitability. In Grimm's previous life, Earth was a low-magic world and lacked the existence of extraordinary powers. This was why precise science had appeared. Even the most ordinary human could use microscopes and other auxiliary devices to examine the microscopic level of the molecular level. And in a high magic society, no matter how difficult it was to cure a mortal's disease, it could be treated with a small dispel spell. If it did not work, a bottle of healing potion made from the water of life could be used to bring the dead back to life and rejuvenate. It was precisely because of the convenience and miraculousness of extraordinary powers that when magi encountered problems, they would use magic as the only way to solve them. This also caused the natural sciences, humanities, social sciences, and precise science in various material planes to lag behind. However, these were inevitably replaced by a certain system of magic. Organ transplants on Earth also existed in high magic worlds, but they were more convenient and violent. The magi participating in the surgery did not even need to be proficient in human organs or live dissection. They only needed a small spell called organ activation. Although the dissection of creatures was bloody and the operating table was no different from a slaughterhouse, the creatures in high magic worlds also had strong vitality that was 10 times stronger than those on Earth. No matter how crude the surgical conditions were or how crude the surgical process was, when the light of supernatural powers shone on them, the dissected subjects were still full of vigor and violence when they climbed down the operating table. The artificial intelligence that Earth had could also be found in high magical world. That was the tower spirit of the top-notch wizard's pagoda. While the people of Earth were still worried about the betrayal of artificial intelligence, the wizards had already tamed the tower genie into the most loyal and reliable servant. Many sorcerers spent their entire lives in their own sorcerer tower. Some magi who were especially infatuated with their lovers would even fuse the souls of their lovers with the tower genie in order to stay with them for the rest of their lives. Stripping the soul and fusing the soul with matter was a technology that was difficult to reach even when Earth's technology was developed to an extremely high level. Therefore, in two different environments, similar material conditions gave birth to two completely different ways of civilization. The civilization of science and technology and the civilization of witchcraft. Grimm was a witness to both civilizations. He was a true wizard, but the chip in his mind was the crystallization of a technological civilization. Thus, when he worked hard to fuse the two civilizations together, he had a life and soul that far exceeded that of an ordinary wizard. While other magi in his position indulged in all sorts of intrigue and power struggles, he could not help but want to lift the veil that covered his eyes and let himself see the truth of the world with his own eyes. It was precisely this condescending view of life that made him keenly aware of the power of these mystical insects. Of course, it was difficult for an ordinary wizard to reach this level of power. Only an individual like him, who was a part of both civilizations, could find a way to bypass the upper limit of gene absorption. Thus, over the past few days, Grimm had devoted most of his time and energy to researching the insects. Although he had not made any breakthroughs, the alternative plans that the chip had suggested had all been verified. Currently, Grimm was working hard to extract the mysterious substance from the bodies of the mysterious insects that could steal life's genes. This undoubtedly consumed a lot of time and energy. This was a biological laboratory that was filled with magical colors. The entire wall emitted a bright, soft, and colorless white light, illuminating the interior of the room. However, in the middle of the laboratory stood a dozen translucent cocoons. Beneath the cocoons was a thick layer of flesh that covered the floor of the biological laboratory like a carpet of fungi. Some of them even extended to the walls. The cocoons and the carpet of fungi were connected by a few thick flesh tubes. These tubes were attached to the surface of the translucent cocoons and grew like the blood vessels of a human heart. They constantly transported light yellow nutrients into the cocoons. Through the translucent cocoon membrane, one could vaguely see embryos of various shapes and sizes floating in the cocoons. From their size and shape, it could be determined that the embryos in the cocoons belonged to different stages of the same organism's asexual reproduction. In the middle of the large cocoon, the mysterious insect that Grimm had captured from Medusa's body was floating with its limbs spread out. Even its scorpion tail was hanging limply, as if it was in a deep state of anesthesia. As for the owner of this biological laboratory, Grimm was currently pacing back and forth between the cocoons, silently observing the evolution and development of each embryo. Due to the lack of the support of precise science, it was simply impossible for Grimm to build a biological laboratory that was similar to the one on Earth from scratch. Thus, Grimm borrowed the thinking of biological science on Earth and various methods of the sorcery civilization to create this magical biological laboratory. The nutrient fluid that supported the survival of the insects and embryos contained almost all the nutrients needed for evolution. It was a miraculous medicine that Grimm, the top pharmacist of the Blazing Flame Monarch, had meticulously concocted according to Grimm's instructions and requirements. Any embryo that was thrown into it would be able to evolve from a larva to an adult in the shortest time possible under the stimulation of the extremely concentrated life force potion. This process was still controllable. The concentration of the life force potion that was injected at every moment was under the control of Grimm, the owner of the laboratory. Due to the preciousness of the insects, Grimm had not been able to find a second one even after carefully searching through the old spider's lair. Therefore, in order to avoid completely destroying such a precious experimental specimen due to his own mistakes, Grimm first needed to cultivate a large number of substitutes for the alien insect specimen before extracting the alien insect gene fragments. Although this particular insect was only a larva, Grimm was able to successfully extract its life force through the AI chip's deep scan. Therefore, the next step was to work hard to cultivate Alien Insect 2, Alien Insect 3, Alien Insect 4. Since the specimen was not the only one, he could put some deep work into slicing it and isolating its genes. Grimm quickly arrived in front of a cocoon bubble. Within the light yellow nutrient fluid was an irregular piece of flesh the size of a palm. More than 10 long tentacles hung by the side of the piece of flesh and waved about, allowing it to swim around freely like a fish. Although there were no eyes, ears, nose, or any other organs on its body, and there was no hidden system of life within the piece of flesh either. However, when Grimm's gaze passed through the cocoon and landed on the piece of flesh, it actually stopped moving like a startled little beast and sank to the bottom of the bubble. Playing dead. This seems to be a survival ability that only mid-level intelligent beings can master. Could it be that this unremarkable piece of flesh already has the intelligence required for a mid-level life form? Grimm grinned and sighed silently. The mysteries of the sorcerer world's life system were indeed beyond his imagination. Any past knowledge and rules would only serve as a shackle for future research. If he wanted to progress in this new system of mysticism, the most important thing was to get rid of the interference of the fixed thoughts in his mind. Grimm silently drew a rune in the air and inserted it into the blanket of fungi below him. The flesh tube coiled around the cocoon membrane trembled slightly, and a concentrated life force potion was injected into the bubble. Grimm laid on top of the cocoon membrane and stared unblinkingly at the reaction of the flesh. The flesh, that was still playing dead, began to tremble violently under the stimulation of the powerful life force potion. More than 10 tentacles retracted back into the body, and the piece of flesh began to swell and change shape. Under Grimm's almost penetrating AI chip scan and spiritual sense, the piece of flesh continuously absorbed the nutrients into its body and quickly transformed into the corresponding flesh tissues and internal organs. Some muscles and bones appeared out of nowhere and gradually developed. Then, the muscle fibers attached to them stretched them to the appropriate position, forming the initial frame of the alien insect in the future. This process was mystical and mysterious. It had the rigor of a life science, but it also had the uncanny workmanship of a mysterious force. Grimm was secretly amazed as he watched. However, the moment the alien insect's skeleton had just been constructed, a mysterious genetic shock suddenly destroyed everything. The sound of the chain breaking occurred at the genetic level, and the alien insect that was halfway through its evolution exploded into a bloody paste. This time, the explosion was so uniform that not even a single grain of meat was left in the cocoon, turning it into minced flesh and blood, evenly painting the cocoon membrane a glaring blood-red color. Grimm straightened his back in disappointment. The AI chip's prompt sounded in his mind. Chapter 477. The entire northern region was the territory of the witches. The once powerful 13 witch factions divided the entire northern region into 13 tightly connected territories, and in the center was a vast neutral territory with an area of hundreds of miles. The seat of the witch council, Vilning. To be honest, Vilning was a huge city with a population of nearly 300,000. The most well-known place in the city was the council hall located in the center of the city, a sacred place for the witch leaders to gather and discuss. Since each witch faction had its own territory and dominated all external affairs in the territory, the witch leaders would not waste their precious time to go to this remote place and quarrel endlessly at the conference table. Therefore, unless it was a major event that involved multiple witch factions, the witch leaders would not waste their precious time running to this remote place to quarrel endlessly at the conference table. In order to maintain their justice and fairness, the Ceticilia family vowed to protect Vilning for life and would never reveal their family's strength in Vilning. Due to the constraints of this ancient oath, the iron mask flag of the Ceticilia family was always fluttering in the sky above Vilning, never changing, Even though there were only 7 witch factions left in the past and the surrounding factions' territories had changed many times. Due to the constraints of this ancient oath, even though there were only 7 witch factions left from the original 13 factions and the surrounding factions' territories had changed many times, the Iron Mask flag of the Ceticilia family had always been flying in the sky above Wilning and had never changed. It was a peaceful and leisurely afternoon. While Ulthar and 5 witch apprentices were patrolling the sky around Vilning on their flying brooms, they suddenly saw a black spot in the distant sky. Someone has come to Vilning? Ulthar frowned, pushed the flying broom under her with her hand, turned around, and flew towards the black spot with the other witches. When they were about 200 meters away, Ulthar, the leader of the patrol team, could not help but frown. There were a total of 3 people, riding a magic carpet, which was also the most common means of transportation used by the northern witches during group activities. There were 3 people on the magic carpet. Kneeling at the very front and carefully controlling the magic carpet was a witch apprentice. Judging from her appearance and figure, she seemed to be only 8 or 9 years old. The apprentice robe she was wearing was strange, and the badge on her chest seemed to be engraved with a scale symbol. This was the first time Ulthar had seen such a badge in the past 100 years. Behind the witch apprentice, there were 2 unfamiliar real witches sitting cross-legged. The one in the lead was dressed in an exquisite purple starry robe. His silky silver hair was draped over his shoulders, and his face was unusually gentle and tranquil. Her long and narrow phoenix eyes had a pair of deep blue eyes that left a deep impression. As they flickered, they gave off a bewitching and mysterious feeling. As for the last witch, she seemed a little strange. She was so sturdy that she didn't look like a woman anymore. She wore a pirate's eye patch and green leather armor. In her hand was a thick wooden staff that looked heavy. The witches of Ulthar repeatedly looked at the newcomers, but they could not match them with the witches they knew in their minds. Finally, she couldn't help but speak. "I'm sorry, but Wilning City is just ahead. If you want to visit this place, please return to the surface and follow the rules. Otherwise, according to the rules passed down from ancient times, ordinary witches were not allowed to fly within 30 miles of Wilning City, and they had to be under the supervision of the witches of the Ceticilia family. Only the witch leaders and the witches of the Ceticilia family, who were the guardians, were exceptions. However, as the Witch Council had gradually become a decoration over the years, these rules had been somewhat relaxed. If it were thousands of years ago, if ordinary witches dared to intrude into the surroundings of Wilning City, the witches of the Ceticilia family would have already detained them. They wouldn't have been so polite to dissuade them. As far as I know, some witches have the right to fly directly into the hall of the council. The beautiful witch in the purple robe suddenly spoke. Her voice was low and sweet, but there was a hint of power that could not be disobeyed. Of course, the Witch Council has such a rule. A contemptuous smile appeared on the face of the Ulthar witches. But that rule only applies to the witch leaders of each faction. Ordinary witches can. Before she finished speaking, the voice of the Ulthar witches suddenly stopped, because she saw a mysterious card emitting colorful dazzling light in the hand of the beautiful witch. Card of Fate? The Ulthar witches could become the captain of the inspection team, so they were obviously more knowledgeable than ordinary people. Sensing the mysterious power in the card, she could not help but say, You are the Witch of Fate, Alice?" Although the Ceticilia family guarded Wilning City and never interfered with the private conflicts of the witch factions, they had heard a little about the reopening of the Tower of Fate and the reappearance of the Witch of Fate. During the Battle of Fate, the Ceticilia family had also sent 1 or 2 representatives to attend the ceremony. After they came back, they described the new Witch of Fate, Alice, as a mysterious and unpredictable person. "I am the leader of the Witch of Fate, Alice. I need to go to the hall of the council now. Why are you still planning to stop me?" Alice stared coldly at the witch of the Ceticilia family. "I dare not. Ulthar is willing to lead the way for you." although the one standing in front of Ulthar was only a grade 1 witch. The halo above her head was not something she could easily offend. Therefore, in the face of the powerful Witch of Fate Alice, the Ulthar witches could only give way and accompany them to Wilning City. 2 hours later, the melodious bell of the Witch Council Hall resounded throughout the city. Hearing the bell, many residents of Wilning City walked out of their houses and gathered on the streets, looking at the hall from afar. For most of them, the bell was quite unfamiliar, and they were at a loss. However, to some of the old men, the sound of the bell had awakened a distant memory that had been buried deep within their memories. This bell. I know. This is the bell of the witch leaders to convene the meeting. I remember. When I was young, my white-haired grandfather once described this kind of bell to me. Hearing the old man's excited shout, the listeners could not help but be stunned. Most of them had lived in Wilning City all their lives, but this was the first time they had heard such a bell. Could it be that the long-sealed Witch Council was going to convene again? Witch Council? Are all the witch leaders going to come when they hear this bell? Someone asked in confusion. They will definitely come. As long as they are still northern witches, they will definitely come when they hear this bell. Amidst the discussion, the old man's weak shout sounded a little hoarse. As the former center of power in the north, Wilning City had been silent for too long. Now that they suddenly heard the bell that had been ringing for 100 years, an unconcealable torrent surged in the hearts of all the city residents, and their faces were filled with excitement and joy. Bursts of cheers and dancing, turning Wilning City into a sea of joy in an instant. Just as the city residents spontaneously celebrated, countless apprentice witches wearing the badges of the Ceticilia family mounted their flying brooms and rushed out of Wilning City, flying towards the territories of other witch factions. Alice, who had just ascended to the position of the Destiny Witches for less than a year, actually used the leader's authority to send a proposal to all the witch factions to convene a witch council. For a moment, a stone stirred up 1,000 ripples, and the entire north became restless. Everyone was talking about it, not knowing what the new leader of the Destiny Witches was going to do. And all the witch factions were even more puzzled, not knowing how to deal with this troublemaker who did not play by the rules. According to the tradition left behind by the ancient witches, only the witch leader could make a motion to convene a witch council, and then deal with some internal problems of the witches by gathering votes. However, with the passage of time, all the witch factions devoted their energy to the expansion and development of their own territories, and the witch council, which used to be the highest authority of the northern witches, became less and less important. Even if there were occasional disputes between the factions, several faction leaders would gather together to discuss and solve them, and rarely use the witch council, which was a big killing machine. Therefore, imperceptibly, the witch council gradually became a mere figurehead, and became a rubber stamp for the existing major witch factions to take turns to manage some neutral public cities. However, the reputation of the witch council would only be covered in dust, but would not be erased. Therefore, when the bell in Wilning City's Parliament Hall rang once more, the entire northern lands were turned upside down. Although they were not optimistic about Witch Alice, and although they did not want the witch council to be above them again, when the bell rang, all the witch leaders could only put down the matters at hand with a dark face, and rush thousands of miles away to the familiar yet strange place, Wilning City. For a time, the surrounding area of Wilning City was in turmoil again, and every day, a large number of witches would come tirelessly. On the third day after the bell rang, even the leader of the Pale Witch, who was the furthest away from here, appeared in the council hall. At this point, all the witch leaders in the entire north had gathered in Wilning City. After 132 years, a new witch council was convened. The so-called council hall was actually just an ancient fortress-style castle, and the place where the witch leaders held the council, in the end, was just a dim side hall on the second floor of the castle. On the wall of the side hall, there were 3 long narrow windows. Because it was difficult for sunlight to penetrate, even during the day, torches were needed to light up every corner. In the side hall, an extremely ordinary long table was placed in the middle, and along the table were 14 wooden, crude, high-back chairs. Other than a black, high-back chair placed at one end of the long table, the other 13 chairs were placed on both sides of the long table. Each of the high-back chairs was etched with the corresponding witch emblem. However, at this moment, only 8 of the 13 high-back chairs were sitting, and the remaining 5 chairs were still empty. As for the black, high-back chair at the head of the table, no one dared to approach it. According to legend, the black, high-back chair was the seat of the Witch King. Here, no one dared to offend the dignity of the Witch King. Chapter 478. Meryl, what are you trying to do? The first to speak up was the leader of the Dark Witches, Circe. It was no wonder that she was furious. This was the critical moment when the Dark Tower was experiencing the impact of the Shadow Tide. Every year, when the Shadow Tide broke out, Circe, as the leader of the Dark Witches, had to stay in the Dark Tower to prevent any accidents from happening to the land of origin. But now, as the council hall's bell rang, she could only abide by the ancient contract and come to this old, rotten, and gloomy hall to listen to this ignorant little girl tell her story. A little girl who was only a grade 1 was delusional enough to have the right to sit on equal footing with them. Like Circe, she was not the only leader of the witches who was filled with anger. The leader of the Witches of Pain had even been summoned back by her people from the front line of the war in another plane. When she thought of the tense stalemate in the other plane, and the fact that she had spent 3 days and nights running back to Wilning City, the leader of the Witches of Pain's delicate and beautiful face was filled with an unconcealable murderous intent. In the vast council hall, there were 6 grade 4 witches and 1 grade 3 witch. When they all stared at Alice, who was sitting alone in her chair, the mental pressure that assaulted her was enough to make any grade 1 witch lose their courage. Alice sat there with a pale face. She bit her lower lip and used all her strength to stop her body from trembling. In the face of a room full of high-grade witches, a grade 1 witch like her was not worth mentioning at all. If not for the ancient contract that gave her the right to be the leader of the witches, she would not even have the right to listen in, let alone sit here and discuss important matters with these witch leaders. Alice's azure blue eyes swept across everyone. The energy fields and spiritual undulations on the surface of their bodies stimulated her so much that she couldn't stop crying. Everyone in the room was no less than a small sun in Alice's eyes. The magic glow around them was so strong that Alice would be blinded if she looked at them for more than 3 seconds. In this case, even if Alice opened her eyes as wide as she could, it was still difficult for her to see the other party's face through the strong protective fluorescence. Alice was even worried that if the leader of the Dark Witches, Circe, really roared, just the sound waves alone would be enough to kill a mere grade 1 witch like her. Fortunately, although these chief witches were all furious, they still knew to restrain their witchcraft power and mental fluctuations, lest they accidentally hurt this chief witch. Alice's strength might not be worth mentioning, but her identity was protected by the ancient contract. The northern witches had never publicly killed each other. At least the senior witches at the leader level knew how to maintain the interests of the whole. Alice, we're all waiting for your answer. Among the witch leaders, only the Witch of Death, Thuna, remained calm. However, her words still made Alice's heart palpitate. Although convening a meeting of the witches is the right that every witch leader has. But the witches who call for the meeting must put forward a proposal of sufficient weight, otherwise we, the leaders of the witches, can vote to abolish your authority as the leader of the Fate Witches. Alice sat in the chair in silence for a long time. When her mood calmed down and she began to gradually adapt to the mental coercion of the many senior witches, she finally opened her mouth to speak. Leaders, I've gathered everyone here this time, in order to make the witches of the entire northern region strong again. Alice's words were intermittent. We didn't come here to listen to your empty words. Strong? How to be strong? How to be strong? You'd better say something more practical. The leader of the Dark Witches, Circe, snorted coldly. A large plane that has just ascended for less than 1,000 years. Is it not enough to make the Northern Witches strong again? Under the pressure of so many mental coercion, Alice had to repeatedly adjust her breath to make her words more fluent. A large plane? A large plane. Each of the chief witches could not help but be inexplicably surprised. For the first time, they began to show a trace of interest in Alice's proposal. Say it clearly, what does this large plane have to do with us Northern Witches? This time, it was still the Witch of Death, Thuna, who spoke. After saying that, this level 4 Witch of Death, Thuna, waved her hand at Alice and blessed her with an undead protection. In this way, Alice could be spared the pain of dealing with the mental coercion of the senior witches. Thank you, Sister Thuna. Alice's face finally showed a trace of blood, and she nodded and smiled at the other party. This time, I specifically called everyone here for the re-emergence of us Northern Witches. In order to achieve this goal, I'm going to contribute the coordinates of a large plane that has just ascended for less than 1,000 years and call on all of our sisters to kill our way into it. If we Northern Witches rely on our own strength to take down that plane, would we still have to worry about becoming strong again? All the witch leaders were aghast. The value of a large plane was something that even the people present would find difficult to fully estimate. In the current sorcerer world, the coordinates of a small plane world were worth millions of magic crystals. This was not even a plane that had already been conquered, but a complete plane world. Just the coordinates of a plane world were worth millions of magic crystals. Similarly, the coordinates of a medium-sized plane world were 100 times more valuable than a small plane world. As for a large plane, its value could only be answered with the word immeasurable. One had to know that even the current sorcerer world was only a large plane. However, the sorcerer world had been a large plane for tens of thousands of years, and its strength in all aspects had been developed to the extreme. Only then did it have the opportunity to become a plane overlord with tyrannical strength in the multiverse. If everything that Alice said was true, and the large plane she contributed was really a plane world that had ascended not long ago, then there would not be many level 4 powerhouses in the plane. In this way, it might not be possible to completely swallow it with the strength of all the Northern Witches, but it was still possible to occupy a certain amount of territory and then take the opportunity to plunder the plane's resources. However, how could Alice be willing to contribute such a precious resource like the coordinates of a large plane? If the same situation had happened to any of the witch leaders in the field, they would have made a fortune in silence. They would have led their own families to stir up trouble, and would not have contributed anything to share with others. One had to know that once the world coordinates of a large plane were shared, everyone would work together to open the door to a new world. No one could say for sure who would gain more and who would gain less. Perhaps one's luck was too bad, and they would be surrounded by the plane's natives as soon as they entered. At that time, not to mention plundering resources, even the troops that they brought in might be lost. In this respect, Alice did not necessarily have any advantage over the others. The more they thought about it, the more incredulous they felt. However, looking at Alice's current strength, they vaguely had an answer. That was a large plane. Even if it was as Alice said, and it had only ascended from a medium-sized plane not long ago, its basic strength was still there. No matter how weak the other party was, it was not something that a group of Tier 1 witches could manipulate at will. If a Tier 1 witch like Alice broke in, the most likely outcome was that she would be easily killed by the enemy like a bedbug, with no room for resistance. As for holding the coordinates of a large plane in her hands, and waiting for her strength to increase before looking for opportunities, this idea was even more childish to the point of making people laugh. By the time Alice grew her fangs, the other party would have already grown into a behemoth. At that time, the gap in strength between the two would not be narrowing, but widening at a faster speed. So from this point of view, it was not so unreasonable for Alice to contribute something that she could not covet in pursuit of more substantial benefits. After thinking about this, the expressions of the many witch leaders could not help but relax. For the first time they felt that this little girl Alice was quite good. Even the leader of the Witches of Pain, who had been wearing a cold face, could not help but feel a little better. Alice, if what you've just said is true, then I'll tell you. Then how are you going to prove it? Don't tell me you want to hand over the coordinates of that world now? The leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, was the first to raise her question. I hope that you can choose 2 representatives to go to the Tower of Destiny. I will hand over the world coordinates there. At that time, you can take the opportunity to test the authenticity of this world coordinate. But before everyone prepares for the invasion, I still hope that the world coordinates will be kept in my hand. Look, this plan. Alice immediately threw out the idea that she had already thought about. The witch leaders looked at each other and thought for a while, but did not find anything wrong with it. That's good. Thona nodded. Then, sisters, let's vote to decide who will be responsible for testing the world coordinates. There was no doubt that such a candidate could only be chosen from the 6 Tier 4 witches, so the Tier 3 Winter Witch leader, Morgana, was automatically excluded. Although the 6 Tier 4 witches were of the same rank, there were always some of them who were highly respected, so it did not take much effort for everyone to elect the Witch of Death, Thuna, and the Dark Witch, Circe. Originally, the Pale Witch, Sylvia, was also a good candidate, but before Alice became a Witch of Destiny, she was a member of the Moya family under the Pale Witch. So in order to avoid the possibility of collusion between them, the leaders still chose Circe, who was at odds with Alice, to be the judge. However, just as everyone reached an agreement and became satisfied with each other, the Dark Witch, Circe, suddenly trembled, and a black mist spread around her. Alice, how dare you? You actually dare to send people into the secret realm of darkness to kidnap people. You're courting death. Chapter 479. The dense light from the teleportation slowly dissipated in the teleportation room. 6 hazy figures gradually materialized, appearing in front of Grimm bit by bit. Welcome, Lord Ender. It was obvious that Grimm was hesitant about how to address Mary. Therefore, when he straightened his body, he met Mary's teasing red eyes. 6 people had arrived at the blazing flame monarch through the teleportation formation. Poison centipede Ender, blood-sucking Mary, her 3 blood knights, and that old fox Wenlier. Though they seemed normal on the surface, Grimm could tell from countless minute details that Mary and Ender had severe injuries on their bodies. This was especially so for Poison Centipede Ender. After being imprisoned for a long time in a dark illusion, her body had been seriously contaminated by shadow matter. It seemed that without a period of recuperation and treatment, it would be difficult for her to return to her peak strength. Kid, looks like this old hag will have to stay here for a while. Although Ender's origin was injured, he was in an unprecedentedly good mood. He could not help but smile at Grimm, and a trace of benevolence appeared on his ugly and gloomy face. Welcome, welcome, you're warmly welcomed. Treat this place as your own home. I've already arranged everything. It was just a few short sentences, but Grimm's forehead was covered in sweat. Sorcerers were fickle and selfish to begin with. They prioritized their own interests over everything else. Now that a relative, Ender, had suddenly appeared, even Grimm, who had always been calm, found it difficult to keep his composure. All right, then I'll go and rest. It was obvious that Poison Centipede Ender had used up quite a bit of her spirit in order to survive this long-distance teleportation. Now that she was in a safe place, her spirit could not take it anymore. Gargamel, bring Lord Ender to her residence. Gargamel, who had been waiting at the side, immediately led the poison woman away with a fawning smile. When only Mary and her subordinates were left, Grimm regained his composure. Seeing Mary in blood-red armor, he could not help but reveal a sincere smile. Why, Don't you want to know how Alice is doing now? Mary's tight blood-red leather armor showed off her beautiful figure. She raised her eyebrows, and a playful smile appeared on her delicate face again. Don't worry. Before we leave, that Alice will still be in good condition. She seems to have reached an agreement with those witches, so as long as the dark witches don't have any direct evidence, they won't be able to touch her. I'm not worried about her, I'm worried about you. Grimm smiled as he took a step forward. It's not that easy to break through the dark illusion. I can see that your internal injuries are not light either. How about I help you take a look? Mary's body stiffened. She rolled her eyes at Grimm and waved her hand without looking back. Lord Grimm and I still have some matters to attend to. You guys can take a stroll around the tower. Remember, don't cause trouble for me. Yes. The three Blood Knights bowed at the same time. Soros and Venlier quickly glanced at Grimm, then walked out of the teleportation room without saying a word. Let's go. Didn't you say that you're going to protect my body? Mary smiled charmingly. Let me take a look at you. Why did your mind suddenly become so weak? 6 hours later. After an intense brawl, the satisfied couple finally stopped. Their bodies intertwined, and they hugged each other as they lay on the bed, beginning their real conversation. In fact, Mary only knew a little about Alice's plan. She only knew that Alice had to go to the Witch Council to lure away the leader of the Dark Witches, Circe. She then used her status as the leader of the Dark Witches to call for a meeting. This method was obviously very effective, and she really managed to lure Circe away from the Dark Illusion realm. Taking advantage of the absence of Circe, the master of the Wizard's Pagoda, and the time when the Dark Shadow Tide was about to attack, Mary broke into the Wizard's Pagoda, killed her way into the cells at the bottom, and successfully took away the poison centipede, Ender. The whole process was described by Mary herself. Even though he knew that she had succeeded, Grimm was still shaken to his core. He could sense something else from the simple description. Foresight. Foresight. First of all, before the Dark Illusion realm faced the Dark Shadow Tide, the Dark Witches would clean up the Shadow Valley a dozen days in advance, then temporarily cut off the connection between the Origin Wizard's Pagoda and the Sorcerer's World. This also prevented the possibility of an enemy infiltrating the Origin Wizard's Pagoda from the Sorcerer's World, and allowed them to focus on dealing with the Shadow World's challenges. Alice had obviously predicted this situation, so she ordered Mary to infiltrate the Shadow Valley a month in advance, and successfully evade the search of the Dark Witches. So when the Level 4 wizard Circe was not around, and the main forces of the Dark Witches were deployed to the Shadow World, Mary, who was hiding in the Shadow Valley, immediately killed her way through the weakest link of the Origin Wizard's Pagoda, and managed to break into the underground cells. Under normal circumstances, rushing into the cell was already the limit of Mary's power. It was simply impossible for her to take someone away from there. After all, the connection between the Sorcerer's World and the Shadow Valley had been temporarily cut off, and any ordinary teleportation spell would not be able to escape. But it was still no match for Alice's magical methods. Alice had given Mary a round silver stone before they set off. When Mary found Ender, she did not have to force her way out. She only had to take out the silver stone and chant the necessary activation incantation, then the silver stone would successfully bring them back to the Tower of Destiny. Of course, Mary didn't know what the mysterious silver stone was, but Grimm couldn't help but smile when he heard it. Throughout the entire rescue process, Alice had completely displayed the powerful ability of foresight. Every move of the enemy, and even every arrangement, had been completely grasped by her. She could also make full use of all the resources and opportunities around her, paving a path to victory for herself. The power of the talent of destiny could be seen in this. Of course, the strength of the favored of destiny was never their own strength, but their deep understanding of the laws of the world, as well as the extreme use of the resources at hand. Without an obedient Mary, no matter how good Alice's plan was, it would be difficult for it to completely go according to her expectations. It was like two boxers engaged in a life-and-death fight, and one of the boxers had the ability to foresee the landing point and posture of the next 3 punches of the other boxer. So when the boxer threw the first punch, he dodged and counterattacked at the right time. Then, at this moment, there was a small turning point in destiny. When the foresight of destiny changed the result of the first punch, would the opponent still stubbornly throw the second and third punch according to the predetermined trajectory of destiny? No, at this moment, under the influence of the ripples of destiny, it was no longer destiny that controlled the development of the world, but the established laws hidden behind the world. Only when the ripples of destiny dissipated would this small world once again enter the orbit of destiny, surging forward majestically. It was out of reverence for the power of destiny that Grimm cared so much about Alice's identity as a witch of destiny. And now, Alice had indeed displayed her aptitude and ability as a witch of destiny. More importantly, their relationship was very harmonious. This could be seen from Alice's plan. Poison Woman Ender could be considered Alice's only relative in this world. For her, Alice was even willing to face one or more grade 4 witches head-on. Now that she had sent Poison Woman to the Blazing Flame Monarch and into Grimm's hands, it was obvious that she did not care that Grimm would use this to threaten her. This was what Grimm was most gratified about. Although Grimm had understood most of Alice's plan, he still couldn't figure out how she had subdued Mary. Grimm simply knew Mary too well. In order to fight for the position of the leader of the faction, she had even fought with him. Moreover, Grimm believed that even if Mary really obtained the title of the victor, she would only push everything to Grimm and use the title of the leader of the faction to satisfy her deep-rooted mentality of being a powerhouse. Therefore, to Mary, ordinary preaching and enticement of benefits were ineffective. The only way to win her respect was to fight. Only by displaying the strength of a powerhouse would she be able to smoothly find her own position in their relationship. Otherwise, Mary would forever hover between obedience and disobedience, constantly worrying. Hence, Grimm was very curious about how Alice had subdued Mary. After a round of coaxing and pestering, Grimm finally found out about the behind-the-scenes deal between the two women. Bloodline shackles. After hearing Alice's method, Grimm slapped his thigh hatefully. Damn it, why didn't I think of this? However, he also knew that even if he had thought of this method, so what? With Alice's methods, would he be able to successfully find that vampire? As the saying went, if you have the strength, you can't use your brain. He did not have such a method, so he could only rely on brute force to defeat Mary. On the other hand, Alice could easily subdue her with just a few words. Perhaps this was how the witches of destiny did things. However, Grimm did not know that while he was fooling around with Mary, in the distant Tower of Destiny, Alice was silently weeping as she faced the sky full of stars. When the beautiful starlight shone down, it illuminated her exquisite and beautiful face, as well as her silky long hair that was half silver and half white. Unknowingly, half of her hair had already turned white. For the fastest novel reading, please visit Chapter 480. The battle was still going on under the night sky. Both sides were fighting with all their might. Although they had suffered heavy casualties, they still did not retreat. Overall, the Abbé B-men still had the upper hand on the battlefield. The B-men warriors were attacking in small groups, using their poisoned arrows to attack the lone ogres. The ogre warriors, on the other hand, were not afraid of the scattered poisoned arrows at all. Instead, they roared and grabbed rocks the size of a human head and threw them at the Abbé B-men. In the forest, poisonous arrows and stones collided with one another, and B-men warriors were smashed into the treetops one after another. With the help of wizard Zack's bloodlust spell, the ogres with hardened skin began to glow with a blood-red light. They waved their clubs and withstood the concentrated poison arrows, attacking the defense line formed by the B-men warriors. The difference in individual strength between both sides was too big. 2 or 3 B-men warriors were no match for the ogres. If the Abbé Bee-men did not have the absolute advantage in numbers, the two-headed ogre wizard Zack would have already charged into the beehive with more than 40 ogres. These wild ogres were more than 3 meters tall, and their bodies were as sturdy as barbarians. They did not wear any armor. Other than a simple animal skin around their waist, they did not have any protective gear. Every time Wizard Zack let out an angry roar from behind, these ogres would yell and wave their thick wooden clubs towards the Beemen's defense line. Facing the concentrated poisonous arrows of the Bee-men, they did not dodge. Instead, they used their thick left arms to cover their heads, which were vulnerable to attack, and waved their simple weapons as they rushed forward. When the poisonous arrows hit their bodies, most of them were blown away by their hard skin. Only a few could penetrate their skin and hang on. The ogres did not care about these scattered poisonous arrows at all. They continued to charge forward as if they were flying. Their strong bodies gave them a strong vitality. These poisonous arrows, which could kill normal forest beasts, could only make the ogres feel a little dizzy. When Wizard Zack waved his bloodlust spell and enveloped their bodies and resistance to dizziness were instantly nullified. All the ogre warriors charged forward and attacked in a frenzy. The Bee-men warriors in front of them were smashed into a bloody pulp by the ogre warriors. The only ones who could contend with the ogre warriors were the two strange insects. These two strange insects looked like locusts and bees. They were more than 2 meters long and had 2 pairs of translucent wings on their back. The most impressive thing about them was their lightning-fast flying speed, as well as their terrifying jaws at the front of their heads. They flew as fast as lightning, leaving a trail of red in their wake as they arrived before the ogre warriors. Their razor-sharp forelimbs could pierce through the thick arms of the ogres. Once they latched onto the enemy, they would use their large pincers to slice open the ogre warrior's throat. If the other party continued to resist, the alien insects could use their terrifying mouthparts to bite off the other party's neck. Although the ogres had a strong recovery ability, they could not withstand such crazy destruction. Therefore, in the forest, 2 curling red lines flickered everywhere. Wherever the 2 alien insects appeared, there would be an ogre warrior falling to the ground in an earth-shattering roar. The speed at which the ogres slaughtered the Bee-men warriors was not slow, but the speed at which the blood locusts slaughtered the ogres was even faster. It was as if both sides were in a killing match, causing a storm of blood in the middle of the forest. The 2 blood locusts each had 11 points of strength, 8 points of vitality, and 13 points of agility. Their strength was not inferior to the ogres, and their terrifying 13 points of agility were enough to crush ordinary ogre warriors. However, they obviously knew how terrifying the twin-headed ogre wizard Zack was. Therefore, every time they pounced on the ordinary ogres, they would only avoid Zack's position. Although Zack was also called a wizard, he was unfortunately a strength type. Whether it was bloodlust, attack acceleration, or brute strength, they were all buff close-range attack spells. In a situation where it could not catch up with the 2 blood locusts, it could not do anything to them even with its terrifying brute strength. Therefore, from time to time, Zack's loud roars could be heard on the battlefield. While the Bee-men and ogres were fighting, a wretched black figure was crawling in the shadows of the bushes in the distance, looking at the bloody battlefield with indescribable excitement. After this period of bloody killing, Bliss's strength had also increased crazily. Now, he had reached the peak of a high-level apprentice, and was only 1 step away from becoming a quasi-wizard. Therefore, even though he knew that there was a certain degree of danger for him to appear here, out of his desire to increase his strength, he still went into the bloody battlefield without a care for his own safety, and took advantage of the fact that the 2 sides were not paying attention to him. He stared at the battlefield meticulously, and whenever an ogre warrior fell, he would command the thorn scorpions to secretly dig through the ground. Looking for an opportunity, the thorn scorpions suddenly drilled out of the ground while no one was watching, and then dragged the corpse into the underground worm tunnel. Stealing corpses. Only someone like Blitz, who had a completely twisted mind and personality, could do such a tasteless thing. If it were any other apprentice, they would definitely not do such a dangerous thing. But just as Bliss was in high spirits, he suddenly shivered and turned his head to the southwest. Just now, one of the insect spies he had placed in the periphery suddenly caught sight of a strange figure. The bright red armor, the spreading bat wings, the graceful figure, and the insufferably arrogant attitude. For no reason, the moment he saw the red figure, Bliss suddenly felt an indescribable fear and trembling in the depths of his heart. As if he had seen his natural enemy, Bliss's body and soul suddenly trembled uncontrollably. Who is this person? I clearly don't know her, but why is this body so afraid of her? Just as Bliss was shocked to the point of not being able to move, Mary and her 4 subordinates descended from the battlefield. With an ear-piercing whistle and falling leaves, Mary flapped her wide bat wings and descended from the sky like a beautiful goddess of war. Her posture was graceful as she floated 5 meters above the ground. Behind her, there were 3 fully armored knights standing silently. Their blood-red eyes were fiercely scanning every living being in the field. Their black cloaks with red edges were fluttering high in the air. The old fox, Venlier, was still dressed like a middle-aged noble. He perched on a thick branch high up in the tree crown, watching the battlefield excitedly. In his eyes, every living being on the battlefield was a good food. Human sorcerer, you've crossed the line. Facing the few people who had descended with such force, the twin-headed ogre wizard Zack could not help but step out from the crowd and roar at Mary in a low, muffled voice. "TSK, since when did you magical creatures learn from the humans and play by the rules? Don't forget, this is the Dark Forest. Whoever has the bigger fist is the truth." Mary's scarlet eyes became brighter and brighter, and a thick, bloody mist emanated from her body. "Magical creatures, tremble in fear. Howl in grief. Mary will be the ruler of this place from now on." With a declaration of war, Mary retracted her bat wings, and her entire body turned into a ray of red light, pouncing towards the twin-headed ogre Zack's side in an instant. Zack, who had never known fear, roared. Red light burst forth from his body, and the thick wooden club in his hand smashed towards the red light with a whistling sound. With the help of his increased attack speed, Zack's movements were almost twice as fast as before. However, against Bloody Mary's high agility, this speed was still not enough. The red light made a turn and passed under the thick wooden club by a hair's breadth, brushing past Zack's right ribs. In an empty space in the forest 30 meters away, the red light flickered, and Mary's slender and graceful figure appeared. When she raised her hands and gently licked the blood stains on her blade-like claws, everyone suddenly realized that Zack had been injured. 10 scratches of varying depths appeared on Zack's right ribs. His originally tough skin that was comparable to cowhide could not withstand the claws imbued with blood energy, and 10 wounds that were neither light nor heavy were left on Zack's body. With the twin-headed ogre's powerful physique, such injuries were nothing. Under normal circumstances, it would only take 3 to 5 seconds for the wound to close, and half an hour for the wound to return to its original state. However, what was surprising was that the wounds on Zack's body were vaguely surrounded by traces of blood energy. No matter how Zack tried to activate them, the wounds that had just closed would explode again under the corrosion of the blood energy. "Damn it, what's this?" Zack roared angrily, and the wooden club in his hand danced vigorously. Streaks of bright red light began to explode on his body. Bloodlust, attack speed, brute strength. With the support of these spells, the twin-headed ogre wizard Zack's strength skyrocketed. Once again, he roared and charged at the enemy that had infuriated him. This time, however, it was not Mary who stood beside him, but a fully armored blood knight, Soros. Although a Tier 2 knight didn't live up to its name, its tough body was the real deal. Thus, in a head-on battle, the twin-headed ogre Zack was defeated by Soros in his area of expertise. The The 3 Grade 2 knights from another plane could only display the strength of Grade 1 elites in the Magus world. However, it was enough to deal with these unbearably crude wild monsters. Bliss hid in the shadows and watched as Mary and the 3 Blood Knights turned the battlefield upside down like a whirlwind, chopping up the tall and mighty ogre warriors like they were vegetables. The fear in his heart grew stronger and stronger. Maybe I should slip away, Bliss thought to himself. Chapter 481. This was a massacre that was as easy as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. In terms of numbers, the Abbé Beemen and ogres were the largest tribes in the area. Their strength was enough to suppress the other tribes, and even large creatures like the wyverns did not dare to trespass their territory. However, it was unfortunate that the 2 demonic creatures, who had always been fearless, were being suppressed by the Blood Queen's domineering might. Yes, it was a complete suppression. The 3 Blood Knights formed a triangular formation on the battlefield of flesh and blood, wielding runic longswords that could be used at close range or long range. Every time they unleashed their powerful blood-type sword techniques, an equal number of ogres would fall to the ground. It was obvious that the Blood Knights' main enemies were the sturdy ogres. Thus, they threw most of their powerful sword techniques at the areas with the most ogres. However, they were very careful with their attack. All the ogres were only injured but not killed. While their bodies were severely injured, it was not life-threatening. The Abbé Beemen, on the other hand, were not so lucky. Against the Abbé Beemen who hid in the treetops like flies and shot poison arrows, or swooped down with spears to launch surprise attacks, the Blood Knights were ruthless. The Beemen warriors who were hit by the sword aura were instantly corroded by the blood energy and turned into corpses that fell from the sky. Most of the blood in their bodies would be forced out, condensing into a fist-sized crimson ball of blood that circled around the Blood Knight. Whenever a Blood Knight's body was injured, a portion of these blood spheres would enter their body and replenish their blood energy. When faced with long-range attacks, the blood balls could also transform into various blood-colored shields to block some of the attacks for them. The number of blood balls around their bodies also indicated their individual strength. The 2 Blood Knights only had 2 blood balls around their bodies, while Soros, who was the strongest, had 4. Ever since Mary had modified them into Blood Knights, Soros and the others were no longer afraid of ordinary poisons. Apart from 1 or 2 fatal spots on their bodies, they were no longer afraid of being injured like humans. Absorbing the blood of their enemies to repair their bodies was a strange talent that gave the Blood Knights unimaginable endurance in battle. The 3 Blood Knights charged forward like steel chariots, slaughtering the Abbé Beemen in a frenzy. Their attacks were weak, and their individual strength was far inferior to theirs. During this period, they were also attacked by 2 blood locust wasps. Unfortunately, the physical damage caused by the blood locust wasps could not reduce their combat power at all. But the counterattack of their violent blood sword skill made the 2 blood locusts screech and run away from them. Compared to the Blood Knight, the 2 blood locust wasps were like unarmed farmers. They believed that their attacks could not harm the source of their opponent, but their opponent's strong counterattack could hurt them greatly. The difference in strength between the 2 sides was not small. Now, the Blood Knights had a full set of rune equipment and a complete set of blood combat skills. On the other hand, the blood locust wasps had nothing. They were still fighting with their primitive bodies and instinctive talent. The change in combat power brought about by this addition and subtraction made it impossible for these wizard-level blood locusts to replicate the previous victory. Before the appearance of the Blood Knights, the 2 blood locust wasps could easily slaughter the ogres. However, when they clashed head-on with the Blood Knights, they were wounded and forced to flee in defeat almost immediately. When the 3 Blood Knights successfully defeated all the ogre warriors, the battle between Mary and the twin-headed ogre wizard Zack was also coming to an end. Now, the twin-headed ogre Zack had become a real blood man. The horrifying wounds all over its body were surrounded by sinister blood energy. This made the powerful regenerative ability that it was usually proud of become a mere decoration. If his tall and strong body exerted a little force, he would end up with a fountain of blood and arrows of blood. In the face of a high-agility assassin who appeared and disappeared like a ghost, his violent strength was useless. No matter how he smashed and pounced, the red blood mist that Mary had transformed into always coiled around him, but from beginning to end, she did not have a direct confrontation with him. In the end, his throat was dry and his blood was almost drained. Wizard Zack could no longer be arrogant. He squatted on the ground with his hands on his head. He did not dare to resist anymore. He did not even dare to make the slightest movement, for fear that he would lose the last bit of blood in his body. As the blood mist condensed, Mary's tall and slender figure appeared next to Zack again. When her crystal-clear blood-colored crystal shoes stepped on Zack's head, the twin-headed ogre only dared to groan a little. He was no longer as violent and arrogant as before. The three Blood Knights walked with steady steps to Mary's side. Behind them, there were many ogre warriors lying on the ground, howling in pain. As for those injured Abbey people, Mary was sorry, but almost none of them survived. "Where's Wendler?" Mary looked around and could not help but ask. Among the four subordinates, Wendler's strength was undoubtedly the weakest, so Mary did not force him to participate in normal battles. In Mary's eyes, the most valuable part of Wendler's body was his brain. Combat power was not essential. "Master, I'm here." Wendler's voice sounded from the forest not far away. "Look, Master. What have I brought for you?" Footsteps sounded softly, and Wendler, who had transformed into a middle-aged noble, appeared before Mary with a black robe. For some reason, as soon as the black-robed man saw Mary, his entire body began to tremble. His body, which was covered by the black robe, was covered with black chunks of flesh. These chunks of flesh seemed to be black shell fragments, but they quickly disintegrated into countless squirming black beetles the moment they landed on the ground. They then burrowed back into the black robe. "Are you afraid of me?" Mary tilted her head to look at the strange black robe. Before coming out, Grimm had only vaguely told her that the blazing flame monarch had placed a nail in this area to suppress these monsters, but he did not tell her the details. Now that she recalled Grimm's ambiguous smile when he spoke of bliss, Mary felt that something was amiss. She could faintly smell a familiar aura from this bliss acolyte. That mutated insect queen, Mary's gaze froze, and the spiritual pressure she exerted on Bliss involuntarily carried a hint of killing intent. Back in the day, that vile insect in tech had fought with Mary for an entire year before a victor was decided. The victor lived and the loser died. The cruel battle had filled Mary with loathing for all insect-type creatures, not to mention this Bliss who could vaguely see the shadow of an insect. If it wasn't for Grimm, perhaps Mary wouldn't have been able to hold back and would have skinned Bliss into minced meat. For Grimm's sake, Mary forcefully suppressed the rising disgust in her heart and coldly instructed, "Your Bliss? I've heard Grimm mention you before. What, you've already fused with the insect queen? Take off your clothes and let me have a look." Bliss, who had fused with the mutated insect queen, could clearly sense Mary's cold, killing intent. Of course, this was not because Bliss's spiritual perception was sharp enough to detect a magus, but because Mary had never concealed her disgust towards Bliss. However, the hostility displayed by Mary was not what worried Bliss the most. What truly worried him was the mutated insect queen he had fused with. It was as if the mutated insect queen feared Mary from the depths of its soul. Through the fusion of the origin soul, the mutated insect queen had etched this fear and cowering into Bliss's instincts, causing him to be at a loss of what to do in front of a magus he had never met before. Although he had never seen this powerful and beautiful female magus before, and although he belonged to the same faction as her, the origin soul kept telling him that if he did not deal with her properly, he could very well be killed on the spot. Ever since he had completely transformed into an insect, Bliss was unwilling to reveal his true face in front of others. Whether it was a demon or a human, as long as they saw his true face and showed their disgust, Bliss would treat them as his enemy and think of ways to kill them in the cruelest way possible. However, at this moment, under the pressure of Mary's cold, killing intent, Bliss could only take off his black robe, revealing his shiny black insect body under the sunlight. It had to be said that Bliss had walked deeper and more resolute on the path of insect transformation than Intich. Intich had often used insect transformation as a supplementary method to become stronger. In the depths of his heart, he still hoped to retain a trace of his human instincts. However, Bliss had completely given up on his human identity and only considered strength. Hence, there were no traces of a human acolyte on his insect body. This was simply a strange insect that had stood up straight and was learning to speak like a human. Mary was very satisfied with Bliss's docility and obedience. Back then, she had handed the Insect Queen to Grimm in hopes of strengthening his subordinates. Now that Bliss had done a perfect job, she naturally had no objections. The killing intent from before was more of an instinctive reaction from the memories of the past. With a simple adjustment, Mary's emotions would naturally not be affected. 2 red insects escaped from the battlefield just now. I need to know their current location, Mary ordered coldly. They escaped there. Bliss hurriedly pointed in a direction. They've already escaped back to the beehive with the remaining Abbé bee-men. If you're willing, Bliss will immediately lead the way for you. Under the pressure of death, even Bliss became abnormally obedient, seizing every opportunity to please this beautiful Magus Mary. Summon your insect army, Mary ordered. Look after the ogres here. I'll bring people to clear out the beehive before coming back to take care of these captive. Do your job well, and you'll get 6 of them. Yes, Bliss will do his best to complete your orders, my lady. Bliss's insect body trembled slightly. This Magus Mary was very accurate. As long as Bliss devoured 6 more ogres, he would be able to accumulate enough life force to become a quasi-witch. When that happened, he would no longer be as weak as he was now. After leaving the flesh battlefield, Venlier could not help but approach Mary and ask in a low voice, "My lady, do you really trust this insect man that much? What if he escapes with all the blood and flesh?" Mary didn't even turn her head as she flew forward and coldly left behind a sentence. "Isn't that even better? He better not give me a reason to kill him, or else." Chapter 482. After experiencing the bloody battles of the Dimensional War, Mary had been reborn. She was no longer that rash and ignorant vampire from before. Compared to the magnificent Dimensional War, the extermination of the indigenous magical beasts in the Black Forest could be said to be uneventful, dull, and uninteresting. If not for the sake of clearing a safe territory for the blazing flame monarch, Mary would never have had the energy to do such a trivial job of clearing out miscellaneous soldiers. The agreement between the blazing flame monarch and the indigenous magical beasts could only last for another 3 months, and the human wizards had already revealed their greedy faces. Mary led 3 of her generals and an inept advisor, as well as the helpless Bliss. They met up with the 2 spies Grimm had arranged beforehand, and used a little more than a month to comb through the vast land 1,000 miles to the north of the Wizard's Pagoda. All the indigenous magical beasts that had reached a certain number were either subdued or killed by Mary. There was no third option. The magical beasts that refused to submit to the blazing flame monarch's rule were dealt with, and the valuable ones were captured back to the Wizard's Pagoda as slaves. The less valuable ones were thrown to Bliss, becoming a source of flesh for him to breed battle bugs on a large scale. Bliss, who had originally been conflicted, was naturally overjoyed after receiving so many benefits. He sincerely carried out the tasks that Mary had assigned him. If he were to slowly conquer all of this flesh and blood, he would probably be able to do it in 2 or 3 years. How could he be like Mary, who only used a little more than a month to accomplish all of this in one go? This undoubtedly made Bliss feel grateful for Mary's kindness, and he even silently cursed the mutant insect queen that had fused with him for being petty. The mutant insect queen that was telepathically connected to him fell into a long silence, too lazy to rebuke the ignorant bliss. Only the mutant insect queen, who had fought against her for a year, knew of Mary's brutality and bravery. Others might be deceived by Mary's beautiful and charming appearance, but no matter when it thought back to it, it would always be filled with pain and endless sorrow. After getting rid of those annoying fellows, the remaining territory was undoubtedly much emptier. Hence, the natives who had chosen to surrender first obtained the best territory, and at the same time became the Blazing Flame Monarch scouts and informants in the surroundings. As for the native monsters that weren't willing to submit to the Blazing Flame Monarch and didn't want to be destroyed, they could only move further away under the cover of the night. In a short period of time, the Blazing Flame Monarch's reputation soared, and its name spread far and wide. Even many Magus families in the central continent set this as a training ground for their acolyte. According to the agreement signed between the Blazing Flame Monarch and the Tower Forest Magus Association, a small human settlement was rapidly being developed with Pine Tower Town at the center. Every day, a large amount of resources flowed into Pine Tower Town, and a large number of farmers were gathered to expand their residences. After a little more than a month, the prototype of a small city appeared. The increase in human activity in the rear undoubtedly brought a huge flow of people to the Blazing Flame Monarch. With the original diseased forest as the center, another small town formed solely by mercenaries, adventurers, and trial apprentices was rapidly forming. It also attracted a large number of fur traders, herbalists, arcane merchants, and other fringe professions. As the Gargamel, who was in charge of the daily affairs of the Blazing Flame Monarch, was also a wandering magus, he knew the pain and suffering of wandering magi. Hence, in order to change the oppression and discrimination the other magus families had towards wandering magi, the Blazing Flame Monarch issued many relaxed policies for them. The so-called resident sorcerer was actually a wandering sorcerer. When they wandered to a certain place, they would temporarily reside in an open wizard's pagoda, either to obtain certain knowledge, resources, or simply to borrow the facilities of the wizard's pagoda. Even though they weren't magi stationed in the wizard's pagoda, they would be active in the vicinity of the wizard's pagoda for a short period of time. This short period was usually 1 or 2 years. Of course, there was no lack of magi who would stay in a place for decades. The Gargamel provided the most relaxed living environment for these fellows who chased after magi resources but did not want to be restricted by the magus families. He even allowed their children or descendants to temporarily reside in the wizard's pagoda. Wandering magi were still magi, and they would often form groups to adventure or explore ancient ruins. At this time, the descendants or heirs that followed them all year round would become a hot potato. Bringing them on an expedition was definitely out of the question. If they were randomly placed somewhere, it would easily delay their progress and development. Hence, while the Gargamel invited wandering magi to explore the Blazing Flame Monarch, he also helped them resolve their worries. As long as they were magi residing in the Blazing Flame Monarch, they would enjoy the basic rights of a magus stationed in the wizard's pagoda and would not need to take on any forced magus missions. In addition, the apprentices that followed them would also have the opportunity to study and train in the wizard's pagoda. With the influx of high-quality resources from the Black Forest around the Blazing Flame Monarch, a new resource market was slowly forming. Here, they would purchase raw magical beasts and herbs, then process them into valuable witchcraft materials and potions. The rich profits were enough to attract groups of merchants and wandering wizards. The policies of the Blazing Flame Monarch did not seem very attractive on the surface, but every single one of them resonated with the wandering magi. This might not be able to move them and make them change their original intentions to continue wandering, but the rich resources and relaxed living conditions made them want to stay for a longer period of time. If it was only 1 or 2 wandering magi doing this, it might not change anything. However, if 7 or 8 wandering magi all chose to become magi residing in the blazing flame monarch, the changes it would bring to the blazing flame monarch would be massive. At the same time, there might be a dozen magi residing in the blazing flame monarch's wizard's pagoda. When they were resting, the Gargamel could use generous magic crystals to entice them to take over lessons for the apprentices of the wizard's pagoda. With these magi specializing in various areas, some areas of wizard magic that no one had dabbled in before now had suitable teachers. In a short period of time, the areas of wizard magic that the apprentices of the wizard's pagoda could choose to research became more diverse and comprehensive. This also increased the knowledge and understanding of wizard magic of the apprentices of the wizard's pagoda, giving them more room for development. Of course, in order to increase the reputation of the wizard's pagoda, and to increase the enthusiasm of the magi and apprentices stationed in the wizard's pagoda to obtain contribution points, the Gargamel and Grimm decided to invest some rare resources that were hard to obtain in the outside world into the mission system of the wizard's pagoda. For example, high-level wizard medicines, magical beasts, elemental magical puppets. These were rare resources that were hard to find even in the wizard trade centers, and most of them were monopolized by wizard families and organizations. Even if they appeared occasionally, they would be fought over by people. Ordinary wizards without some wealth would not even think about it. But now, the blazing flame monarch was able to push out a certain number of rare resources through its internal mission system. These resources did not rely on magic crystals or fists, but only a certain number of contribution points. In the blazing flame monarch's wizard's pagoda, there was no need to carry out dangerous wizard missions. All one had to do was quietly stay in the wizard's pagoda, and one could easily obtain contribution points. Be it teaching a few classes every month, acting as a mentor for a certain wizard research project, managing the internal wizard garden, or helping to prepare some wizard ingredients, there were simply too many such missions. Most of the resident wizards could take out some of their leisure time to complete 1 or 2 missions when they weren't adventuring. Thus, the blazing flame monarch was able to support all of the wizard's pagoda's facilities and mission system just by relying on these resident wizards who did not have any contract with the wizard's pagoda. As for the wizards stationed in the wizard's pagoda that truly belonged to the blazing flame monarch, they could take out more time to invest in their own research projects and wizard experiments. This was a good thing that killed many birds with one stone, and it naturally won the unanimous praise of all the wizards stationed in the wizard's pagoda. Thus, amidst the praise of the crowd, Gargamel solidified his position as the chief butler of the blazing flame monarch. Compared to the exceptional management talent Gargamel displayed, Grimm, the true owner of the wizard's pagoda, was extremely incompetent. After delegating most of his authority to Gargamel and Merrill, Grimm hid in the 5th level of the wizard's pagoda, completely immersing himself in all sorts of wizard research and experiments. The plundering worm clone was still continuously trying. Even though it had failed over 100 times and caused him to lose a large amount of resources, Grimm still hid in the 5th level of the wizard's pagoda. Grimm was still unwilling to give up, even though he had already failed over 100 times. After successfully analyzing the mutated fire rune explosion, Grimm had also successfully etched it into the core of his consciousness. This also meant that any fire element wizard spell he cast in the future would have an explosive effect at will. However, even if the core rune changed, the corresponding wizard spell model and incantations would have to be changed accordingly. This was undoubtedly a huge project that consumed a great deal of mental strength to refine and change them one by one. However, with the help of the AI chip, all the tasks that involved large amounts of calculations and data modeling could be passed to the AI chip to slowly grind away at in its free time. That was why Grimm could still take out a lot of time to solve the difficult problems he was facing. In the AI chip's list of free tasks, there were actually 2 rare fire runes waiting for it to slowly analyze. According to the characteristics of the mutated fire rune, The value of these two rare fire runes was obviously higher than its own. Chapter 483. The Blazing Flame Monarch. In a secret room on the 5th level of the Wizard's Pagoda, a ball of black fire rose from within the spell formation and floated steadily in the air. The temperature in the secret room dropped to freezing point, the floor and walls showing obvious signs of frost. Grimm did not care about these abnormalities. He only stared at the fist-sized ball of black fire, deep in thought. He did not have to wait for long. A moment later, a strange spatial ripple came from within the black fire, which then turned into a clear spiritual force. "State your request, wizard." The voice in the black fire was cold and stiff, the spiritual force erratic. It was obvious that it had been disguised using a spell. "Find a person. It's best if you can kill him, but if you can't, tell me his information and location." Grimm's words were simple and direct. "No problem. Send me the basic information of that person." The spiritual force in the black light continued. "Remember, when it comes to killing, a normal human costs 1,000 magic crystals, and a wizard costs 100,000 magic crystals. If the target belongs to a family or faction, the price will increase by 2 to 5 times depending on the situation. Based on your current authority, you are not allowed to accept magi missions above level 2. Grimm's eyes narrowed. Since the other party mentioned a level 2 magus, it meant that they had the ability to kill a level 2 magus. This also meant that there were many level 3 magi in their organization. On the Magus continent, level 3 magi represented the core of the magi community. As for the higher level 4 magi, they were people who spent most of their time in seclusion, only thinking about how to become a great magus. It was rare to see a level 4 magus in the magus community. As expected, the hidden strength of these extremist organizations is beyond imagination. Grimm's heart skipped a beat, but he did not hesitate to send the simple information of his target over. Information received. We will have a result in 3 days. The magus on the other end of the black fire said briefly, then cut off the long-distance communication. The black fire in front of Grimm was extinguished, the floating spell formation also beginning to dissipate. "I hope the other party can give me good news." Grimm pondered in silence. Regarding Mary's bloodline, Alice could only get a name and a person's image through divination, but she lacked more comprehensive information. Lester was a 300-year-old vampire. Compared to 1,000 years of lifespan, he was still in his rebellious youth. He had mysteriously appeared in a manor near Fader South City and lived there in seclusion for tens of years. If it wasn't for the fact that one of his targets was under the protection of the Cerubo family, no one would have noticed his existence. What happened next was exactly as Wizard Anderson had described. The Cerubo family had sent many wizards to surround this beginner wizard vampire, but they were unexpectedly attacked by a large group of mutant blood thralls. Taking advantage of the chaos, Lester escaped with injuries, leaving the Cerubo family's wizards with nothing. Wizard Anderson took the opportunity to search the secret laboratory under the manor and took a bottle of the original blood he extracted from Lester's body. Afterward, he began his research on ancient mutant vampires. Blood Magus 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 Mags Dragon, God and Blood Magus Mags Marion and Mags. Unknowingly, Mary had already become his blood slave. Now that Mary had become an elite wizard, she had caught up to the vampire in terms of strength. As the source of the bloodline, the restrictions of the bloodline shackles were obvious. Under normal circumstances, if the vampire Lester did not advance to Tier 2, Mary would never be able to improve. For the rest of her life, her strength would be trapped below the level of the origin blood. In order to change this, the only way to unlock the bloodline was to find the source of the bloodline and conduct a blood exchange ritual with it. In this way, Mary would be able to obtain the other party's space to grow. Before becoming the next bloodline shackle, she would be free. With Mary's strength and influence, It would be impossible to find her in a sea of people with just a name and a person's image. Even Alice, a witch of destiny, could not directly find Lester's location. This meant that Lester was either in some strange place, or he was being shielded by a high-grade wizard. Otherwise, Alice would not have been able to return empty-handed. Since Alice's information was too simple, Grimm had no choice but to contact a well-known underground organization on the Wizard continent, the Dark Hand, through Gargamel. He hoped to find Lester through their channels. The Dark Hand was indeed a well-known underground organization on the Wizard continent. It only took them 3 days to find the vampire named Lester. However, Grimm's request to kill the vampire was rejected. The reason was simple. The vampire was actually a member of a vampire family. Moreover, the vampire family had multiple Tier 2 vampire sorcerers. Grimm had no choice but to pay 50,000 magic crystals to buy the vampire's detailed information. Lester? The Vic family belonged to the Vic family. It was a vampire family with an ancient bloodline. There were 67 members, including 1 Tier 3 vampire, 3 Tier 2 vampires, 25 pure-blood vampires, and 38 vampires of foreign descent. As for the underage vampires, they would not be recorded in the family tree. The Vic family's base was in the southwest of the scattered Talon region. It was also a place where foreign wizard families gathered. Just like the Stormwind Kingdom established by the Storm Giant, they had reached a peace agreement with human wizards. As long as they did not violate the rules set by the Wizard Association in the Scattered Talon, they could have the same status and rights as human wizard. The Lester that Grimm was looking for was already an elite wizard. He was also one of the top pure-blood vampires in the Vic family. If he wanted to kill this guy, it would be hard to guarantee that the Vic family would not retaliate. With Grimm's current authority, he obviously could not command the Shadow Hand to kill Lester and risk offending a high-ranking wizard, no matter how many magic crystals Grimm took out. That was why the Shadow Hand cut off contact with Lester after selling the information to Grimm. After carefully studying the information in his hand, Grimm immediately fell into a dilemma. According to Lester's travel records in recent years, he rarely left the ancient Blood Castle in the Cadasseran region. It seemed that he had been grounded by the Vic family. This would undoubtedly increase the difficulty of capturing him. As for breaking into the ancient Blood Castle, it would not be too late to wait until Grimm was tired of living. Moreover, Grimm had already left traces of Lester's information through the Shadow Hand. Even if he was lucky enough to kill Lester, the Vic family could easily trace it back to Grimm. The thought of facing a terrifying Tier 2 vampire made Grimm's scalp go numb. If he really provoked such an enemy, even if he hid in the Flame Monarch's wizard's pagoda every day, he might not be completely safe. Therefore, after the in-depth conversation with Mary, Grimm could only put the matter of the vampire aside for the time being. After all, the most important thing for Grimm now was nothing else but his own advancement. Even though advancing to a Tier 2 wizard was still a long way off, Grimm had already found his way forward. All that was left was to accumulate strength and settle down with time. As long as he could successfully become a Tier 2 wizard, the difficulty of these problems would be reduced by half. After all, it was hard to say whether the Tier 3 vampire of the Vic family would choose to fight Grimm to the death for a Tier 1 descendant. Moreover, after Grimm became a Tier 2 wizard, he would not be an ordinary person who relied on time and luck to succeed. When that time came, a Tier 3 vampire might not be as scary as the outside world thought. Ancient Blood Castle. In a dark and damp underground chamber, there were 5 pitch-black, heavy stone coffins placed there. Creak, the ear-piercing sound of the coffins moving could be heard. The torches inserted into the stone walls suddenly lit up, illuminating the eerie secret room and the walls covered in ugly moss. The second stone coffin from the left suddenly opened with a creak, and an old, rotten, cold aura gushed out. Immediately, a black figure suddenly sat up, his scarlet eyes glinting coldly in the dark secret room. As if sensing the commotion outside, the other stone coffin next to it also opened. "Brother, what's wrong? Why did you suddenly wake up from your slumber?" The one who asked the question was a beautiful girl dressed in a golden noble's dress. In the darkness, her scarlet eyes were dazzling. Sitting upright in the dark, Lester was a young man with a handsome face. His perfect mustache was combed neatly, and he exuded a gentle, elegant, and noble aura. Lester, who was in a daze in the dark, finally spoke. "I felt a strange call from my blood. It's as if some of my origin blood has been lost to the outside world, and it's slowly growing stronger." "What?" The young and beautiful female vampire could not help but exclaim. "Don't you know what it means for us to lose our origin blood? Once we lose control of our blood, it's easy to cause a bloodline backlash." Lester obviously knew how terrifying a bloodline backlash was, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not remember when his origin blood had been lost. After all, in order to conduct his bloodline research in secret, he had set up bloodline laboratories in a few places. Although the research process was not smooth, and he had been ambushed by human magi a few times, he had destroyed the laboratories before he escaped. There should not have been any loss of origin blood. "Maybe it's just an illusion. You don't have to worry about me, I'll be careful." Lester's blood-red eyes flickered, and he finally sighed and lay back down in the stone coffin. As the two stone coffins closed again, the flames on the torches were extinguished. Chapter 484. 5 months later. The first elite elemental magic puppet had been sent back to the Solubo family. The feedback from Wizard Forgan showed that the higher-ups of the family were very satisfied with Grimm's obedience, and did not suspect that he had done anything to it. After all, the periodic explosions in Grimm's private alchemy lab could not be hidden from others. Thus, the family was able to grasp Grimm's whereabouts and the basic success rate of creating elemental magic puppets through the spies they had planted in the blazing flame monarch. The violent explosions that occurred every 2 months, as well as the occasional appearance of quasi-wizard and wizard magic puppets in the Wizard's Pagoda's mission system, showed that the once powerful fire wizard had now put all his effort into creating elemental magic puppets. This could be seen from the quantity and quality of the magic puppets he created. Although it was a pity that a portion of the magic puppets ended up in the hands of wandering wizards and acolytes through the mission system, the Solubo family still managed to obtain most of them through various means. Grimm was well aware of this, but he did not interfere. He would still put a certain number of low-level magic puppets into the Wizard's Pagoda's mission system at a fixed time every month. After half a year of orderly operation, the acolytes attached to the blazing flame monarch had practically reached the point where everyone had an elemental magic puppet. These super-powerful puppets also allowed the acolytes' abilities to skyrocket. They no longer had to be as careful when entering and exiting the Black Forest. The blazing flame monarch's 2 hounds, the 3-headed magical hound Anguja and Medusa, guarded the outer perimeter of the Black Forest for Grimm. Magical creatures that could pass through their territory and enter within 300 miles of the Wizard's Pagoda were carefully selected. Those that were too ferocious or posed a potential threat were all kept at a distance of 1,000 miles. If any of them dared to barge in, Anguja and Medusa would send troops to eliminate them. If the other party was too powerful, they could even summon Mary, who had been roaming around the Black Forest with her people. 3 pseudo-grade 2 Blood Knights, a powerful vampire wizard, and a quasi-wizard Bliss were enough to take down any magical creature that had yet to gain a foothold. If not for Grimm's strict rule that forbade Mary and the rest from stepping out of the circle of influence, Mary would have led her people into the depths of the Black Forest long ago. Mary was fearless because she didn't understand the true terror of the Black Grove. Strictly speaking, the area they controlled close to 1,000 miles to the north of the blazing flame monarch was still at the borders of the dark forest. All sorts of strange magical creatures lived and rested here, and their strength was at a level that the blazing flame monarch could handle. If they went any deeper, there was a high chance that they would encounter those terrifying Grade 2 monsters. With the current abilities of the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda, it was still unable to deal with a Level 2 magical beast. Once Mary's rampage attracted the Level 2 magical beasts to the vicinity of the Flame Monarch, the entire Wizard's Pagoda might only be able to defend itself, not daring to venture out. This was not alarmist talk, but something that was very likely to happen. Just like how human magi liked to view the magical beasts of the dark forest as an inexhaustible resource, how could the native magical beasts of the dark forest not be hostile towards human magi? If those high-grade magical beasts discovered a human magus sneaking into the dark forest, they would definitely hunt him down and kill him. Hence, Mary, who was under strict restrictions, became bored and had nothing to do after exploring the area of influence within 1,000 miles. In order to prevent Mary from getting into any trouble out of boredom, Grimm suddenly thought of something and threw the apprentice of the Wizard's Pagoda, Sabrina, to her. He had heard Sabrina mention an ancient relic when he took her in, and there seemed to be some good stuff there. But as Grimm had been busy running around, he couldn't find the time to take a look. As such, he tossed the task to Mary and got her to complete the first exploration mission of the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda. After some selection, the team mainly consisted of Mary, Ender and Merrill, as well as Sabrina and Bliss. It might seem like the team was lacking in numbers, but their hidden strength was far beyond what anyone could imagine. Mary had 3 fake Grade 2 Blood Knights under her, and she was also a powerful vampire wizard. Her team's battle prowess was more than half of the team's overall strength. As wizards of the Wizard's Pagoda, Ender and Merrill obviously had elite magic puppets with them. Even Bliss and Sabrina, who were still quasi-wizards, had a wizard-level magic puppet each. Hence, if the entire exploration team went all out, they could match up to a 10-man team of wizard. As for Grimm, he was either in a state of physical and mental decline, and had to eat a lot of nourishment every day, or his body and mental strength were about to explode, and he was preparing for the next elemental magic lair. Grimm had to temper the sea of lava beneath the blazing flame monarch once a month. For 10 days to half a month after the tempering, Grimm's mental space would continuously tremble and shrink. But this was only temporary. With proper recuperation and nourishment, Grimm's mental strength would increase by 0.04 points after the tremors in his mental space were eliminated. Although this number seemed insignificant if not for the AI chip's meticulous statistics, Grimm would not have been able to detect his improvement. But this progress was real. As long as Grimm put in the hard work, he would eventually be able to convert his mental strength into elemental essences. When that happened, the elemental essence of his body and his mental strength would reach a balance, and the basic conditions for him to advance to Grade 2 would be met. In order to make the most of his time, Grimm would use a voodoo spell to temper his body while he was weakened after tempering his mental strength. His body had already completed its elemental essence conversion, and his body of fire would no longer be damaged by elemental flames. However, this only increased the compatibility between his body and the elemental flames, and did not completely unearth the hidden strength in his body. Hence, Grimm used voodoo spells to stimulate his body to continuously release its potential, and then used a carefully prepared feast of mana to strengthen his foundations. Under the AI chip's precise control, his mental strength and the basic values of his body slowly but steadily increased. As a result, time slowly passed in this cycle of reincarnation day after day. The small team from the Wizard's Pagoda that had gone out to investigate ancient ruins had narrowly escaped death and returned to the blazing flame monarch. The area they had gone to was actually the burial grounds of some ancient wizard sect. After tens of thousands of years of transformation, it had become a vicious place where ghosts and spirits wreaked havoc. If not for the experienced poison centipede, Ender, who had discovered something was wrong, the entire team would have been possessed by the spirits and become half-dead people wandering in the dark caves. Relying on their ferocious firepower, the team used elemental puppets to open a path, and only then did they manage to escape the forbidden land of death. Their reckless actions had caused nearly half of the spirits in the burial grounds to escape, causing a ghost calamity that was neither too big nor too small. In order to avoid being blocked by the scattered magi of the Tower Forest Union, the team retreated that night and returned to the blazing flame monarch. This expedition had caused a few female magi to suffer from varying degrees of spiritual contamination, and it took a lot of effort to get rid of them one by one. However, this expedition was not completely fruitless. In a few tombs that they had explored earlier, they had found and brought back some strange runes. Inside, Grimm had successfully extracted some ancient inscriptions and runes. Of course, most of them were the personal biographies left behind by some ancient magus who was supposed to be the owner of the tomb. Naturally, there was no lack of words that boasted of his achievements and power. However, after getting rid of the rubbish that was flashy and impractical, Grimm found some things that were useful to him. Same-type wizard weapons, or what magi now called soul equipment, had been popular in ancient times, and there had been far more of them than there were now. However, the production of soul equipment required the blood sacrifice of tens of thousands of people. If the ancient magi were allowed to do as they pleased, the already weak human race would not be able to withstand their abuse. This would be a huge blow to the magus world. Thus, a serious conflict broke out between the ancient magi and the world will at that time. The world will had finally perfected the law system and rejected the magi's direct control of the world's laws. This indirectly weakened the power of the ancient magi. This conflict between the ancient magi and the world will lasted for tens of thousands of years, causing a lot of damage to the magus world. The power that the ancient sorcerers possessed was greatly reduced. In order to avoid further backlash from the world will, the powerful sorcerers among the sorcerers could only leave the sorcerer world one after another. They stepped out of the realm and went to other planes and worlds to find a new foothold. From then on, an unwritten rule was formed in the magus world. All great magi who had crossed the 4th grade had to leave the magus world and go to other planes. This was the only way to prevent the powerful power of the great magi from harming the magus world. With the departure of these great magi, many magus systems and sorcery systems had disappeared in the magus world. Soul equipment was undoubtedly one of them. Most of the soul equipment that could be found in the magus world were remnants from ancient times. The current magi had also lost the method to create soul equipment and continuously strengthen it. Chapter 485. Time flew by unknowingly. 67 years. If it were a human, half of their lives might have disappeared just like that. But for a wizard with a basic lifespan of 200 to 300 years, it was only a quarter of their life. As for those who had mutated their bodies and embarked on the path of a bloodline mutation or elemental incarnation, their lifespans were as high as 400 to 500 years. It was not strange for a vampire like Mary to reach 1,000 years of life. It was the same blazing flame monarch, the same wizard tower. But the wizard apprentices living in it had undergone an earth-shattering change. Horus, a high-level wizard apprentice belonging to the blazing flame monarch's wizard tower. His face was fair, his body tall and muscular, and he wore a gray apprentice's short robe all year round. As an outsider, he had been recommended to the tower by a resident wizard 20 years ago. The sorcerer was his only relative in this world. But unfortunately, during a mysterious expedition, his wizard elder did not return successfully. Thus, Horus, who had lost his backer, could only live alone in this mysterious and unfamiliar wizard tower. Luckily, the owner of the tower was wise and benevolent. Even though he looked a little wretched, he had created a relaxed and excellent learning and living environment for the wizard apprentices of the Wizard's Tower. Perhaps it was due to the fact that the person who recommended him was a resident wizard. Horace even got a good job as a librarian. That way, he could easily earn 30 magic crystals and 10 contribution points every month, even if he did not have to follow the troop into the dark forest. This was enough for him to live a comfortable life in the Wizard's Tower. Within the blazing flame monarch's Wizard's Tower, there were 7 or 8 people like him. Most of them were wizard apprentices who had nowhere else to go and decided to treat the tower as their eternal home. Unfortunately, an overly comfortable life could easily slow down their mastery of wizard spells and proficiency in spell incantations. Thus, many of them were stuck at the level of high-level wizard apprentices, and had not improved for many years. Most of the time, Horace couldn't help but wonder if he should give up this comfortable life and follow the mercenaries into the dark forest, honing his combat skills under the fangs and claws of the monsters. In the past decade, only one prospective wizard had successfully advanced to become a wizard, becoming the 9th wizard stationed at the Wizard's Pagoda. Horace had only attended the funerals of 2 of the quasi-sorcerers who had died during the advancement ceremony. The third reason was that his family was too far away from the Wizard's Pagoda, and he had a part-time job in the Wizard's Pagoda, so he was unable to personally send his partner off. This was also one of the main reasons why Horace had been depressed for the past 6 months. For a long time, the success rate of apprentices becoming wizards had never been high. Out of every 4 or 5 quasi-sorcerers, it was already very good if one could successfully advance. As for the Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda, it maintained the rate of 1 advancing wizard every 10 years. In the outside world, this was already an astonishing number. At the moment, the Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda had a total of 9 wizards stationed in the Wizard's Pagoda and 12 resident wizards. This number was enough to crush more than half of the wizard towers in the center of the continent. The large number of sorcerers also attracted a large number of sorcerer apprentices. At the moment, the Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda had a total of 215 wizard apprentices, of which 17 were prospective wizards, 78 were high-level apprentices, and several were beginner to intermediate wizard apprentices, as there was a sufficient number of wizards, and they specialized in all sorts of strange wizard techniques. The Wizard's Pagoda had almost all the basic wizard techniques that were known in the wizard world. Furthermore, every 2 or 3 days, there would be a completely open lecture by a master. These masters were powerful wizards with enviable achievements in certain field. For example, Wizard Mary, who was good at close combat, lectured on the attack techniques of a battle wizard. For example, Wizard Ender, who was good at concocting poisons, lectured on voodoo techniques and mixed poisons. For example, the strange-looking Wizard Bliss lectured on entomology. For example, the gentle and beautiful Wizard Merrill lectured on instant casting technique. For example, the mechanic Wizard Sabrina, whose body had mostly mutated, lectured on the structure of magical machinery. As for Horace, he was fortunate enough to be in close contact with all the wizards of the Wizard's Pagoda, and he deeply appreciated the power of the wizards. However, there was one thing that had been troubling Horace recently. That was, Wizard Ava, who was in charge of lecturing on magical botany, had suddenly stopped lecturing and cancelled a few public lectures in the academic hall, disappearing without a trace. This had undoubtedly attracted the attention of a few apprentices who were studying this knowledge. And Horace was clearly one of them. That Wizard Gargamel had also not shown his face for a few days. Perhaps the next time I see him, I can ask about Wizard Ava's situation. Horace diligently tidied up the library as he silently daydreamed. However, he did not know that at this moment, on the 5th level of the Wizard's Pagoda, a strange event that had almost never occurred in the wizard world was currently underway. 5th level of the Wizard's Pagoda. A small secret room had been isolated as a temporary delivery room, and the heart-wrenching screams were constantly affecting the emotions of the few people present. Like an ordinary human husband, Gargamel, who was thin and haggard like a large mouse, paced around anxiously outside the secret room while twirling his beard. He raised his leg a few times, wanting to barge in, but hesitantly put it down. At this moment, hiding in the delivery room and giving birth was the forest demon Ava, who had been pregnant for 69 years. She was also the cold and beautiful, yet mysterious wizard Ava in the eyes of the wizard's pagoda's apprentices. At this moment, the people bustling in and out of the delivery room were the few female wizards in the wizard's pagoda, Mary, Meryl, Ender and Sabrina. However, even though they all had knowledge of wizard techniques that far surpassed the human scholars, and were also far more ruthless than the bloody butcher, they could only be helpless when faced with the strange half-human, half-demon fetus in the body of the forest demon Ava. In fact, many times they were even more flustered than Ava, who was screaming her lungs out in pain. The fetus in Ava's body had clearly long surpassed the scope of a normal life form. The basic characteristics of a half-human, half-demon made it a strange life form that was difficult for outsiders to define. Thus, the method of delivering the baby had become the biggest headache for the female midwives. However, what gave the few of them a headache was that this strange little life form seemed to be in a stage of crazy growth. When it was about to ripen and break out of Ava's stomach, it actually pulled out a dozen fleshy threads from its long and narrow body and pierced them into various parts of the forest demon Ava's body, maniacally absorbing her life force. Seeing that the life force of the forest demon Ava continued to drop, and that her life was in imminent danger, Mary immediately suggested to forcefully cut open her abdomen and take out this troublemaker little fellow. However, this suggestion was directly rejected by the forest demon Ava, who was in so much pain that she was hovering between life and death. As the mother of a strange life form, she could sense that this kind of life force backlash was extremely important to the future development of this little life form. Regardless of whether it was stopping or interrupting this process, it would have a huge impact on its future that was difficult to make up for. Thus, out of the desire to give birth to the next generation, the forest demon Ava stopped the group from interfering, and even called Gargamel into the delivery room to start making arrangements for the future. Faced with this awkward situation where they could not hit or scold, and could not help in any way, the few female wizards could only continuously take out bottles of life potions, trying their best to maintain the life of the forest demon Ava. However, the effect was minimal. Thus, substitution dolls, false life potions, damage reduction rings. All sorts of wizard items were used in one go, but they were still unable to stop the decline of Ava's life force. Seeing this scene, even though Gargamel was extremely pained, he could understand Ava's feelings. Thus, he no longer dared to mention the matter of forcefully removing the fetus, and could only pound his own head, occasionally taking out some strange potions or plants from his waist pouch for Ava to consume. Watching one's lover slowly die with one's own eyes was the most terrifying torture in the world. Bliss, who had been watching coldly from the side, was now also an elite wizard. As a bloodthirsty and cruel insect wizard, he clearly could not understand the irrational actions of the group. Was there still any value in keeping a descendant who had betrayed his master? There was no other answer to this question in his heart. In his eyes, all living beings in the world were either prey that he could hunt or slaves that he could order around. How could he sacrifice himself and give his life to a descendant that was completely unfamiliar to him? This was completely beyond the understanding of an insect wizard like him. As for Amu and Desira, who had joined the ranks of the Wizards' Pagoda Wizards later on, they could only silently wait for the results. They did not have the right to interfere with the decisions of these veteran wizards. Amu had advanced to become a wizard 50 years ago, and was the second prospective wizard among Grimm's disciples after Meryl to advance to become a wizard. As for the other two prospective wizard disciples of Grimm's older batch, Tori and Lena, one had died immediately after failing to advance, while the other had lost close to 80% of his life force. There was no news of him after he returned to his family dejectedly. As Grimm had completely sealed himself off, he had not taken in any more disciples after Amu and the others. Thus, Wizard Desira, who had unexpectedly advanced, was actually Wizard Meryl's disciple. This Magus Decella could already be considered a third-generation Magus of the Blazing Flame Monarch. No, we can't let this drag on. After estimating the rate at which AI's vitality was shrinking, Meryl could not help but say anxiously, "Lord Mary, you should inform Teacher Grimm. Maybe he can come up with something." Gargamel, whose goatee was about to be pulled out, suddenly raised his head, his soybean-sized eyes shining with hope. "That's right, if I go to Master, maybe he can come up with something." But just as Mary was about to make a prophecy, a deep voice suddenly rang out in the secret room. Chapter 486. As the voice sounded, a strange humanoid figure made of pure elemental flames appeared in a corner of the secret room. 67 years was enough for Grimm to push his spiritual force to the limit of 20 points, and it was enough for him to complete his elemental transformation, achieving a balance between his body and spiritual force. In the past, if Grimm had transformed into his flame demon form, this small secret room would have been scorching hot, making it hard for anyone to stand still. Whether it was the high-temperature domain or the flame barrier, he could turn his surroundings into a sea of fire, a world of scorching lava. But now, with the perfect balance of the fire elemental energy, the overflowing heat had disappeared. A 2-meter-tall fire elemental stood beside them, but they did not feel any change in temperature, nor did they feel the suffocating feeling of the flames licking the air. The flames quietly burned on Grimm's body, like the most docile servant. He was not as violent and ferocious as they remembered him to be. The Magi present could not help but suspect that what they were seeing was just an illusion. There were no flames on Grimm's body. However, everyone could clearly sense the enormous energy aura that was as deep as the sea. It had to be said that after the first 20 years of hardship, Grimm had forced himself to transform into a flame demon in order to stimulate the elemental resonance and balance between his body and spiritual force. In the past, Grimm had to rely on the rune tattoos to transform into a flame demon and become an excellent fire manipulator. But now, no matter if he was eating, sleeping, meditating, or conducting magic experiments, Grimm would always maintain this form of a fire elemental. Fire was no longer a skill of his, but an instinct that was as natural as breathing and speaking. In the past, Grimm was human and fire was fire. The only thing that connected the two was the untouchable fire elemental affinity. But now, most of the time, Grimm's consciousness had already recognized himself as a ball of fire with a humanoid appearance and a consciousness of its own. The benefit of this was that Grimm no longer needed any incantations or hand gestures to cast fire elemental spells. He could simply wave his hand and disperse them at will. The large-scale fire elemental spells that required a long amount of time and energy to cast were now almost instantaneous. Whether he cast it or not, it was no longer about whether he had enough time, but whether he was willing to pay the wizard power required to cast the wizard spell. That was why it was normal for Grimm to be in his fiery form. If it wasn't for Mary's intimacy, Grimm would have abandoned his weak human form. After silently appearing in a corner of the secret room, Grimm did not talk too much with the others. Instead, he went straight to Ava, who was in so much pain that she was hovering between life and death. In the middle of the delivery room was a soft couch. Aiwa was lying on her back, her pale face covered in sweat. She grabbed the edge of the bed with both hands, raised her head, and let out a heart-wrenching scream. Grimm was not affected by the tragedy at all. He stood in front of the bed and bent down slightly. His eyes, which were made of pure red flames, lit up with blue light. With his current 20 points of spiritual force, as well as the AI chip's powerful elemental insight, beyond visual range remote sensing and full-spectrum elemental perception. Ava, who was lying on the bed, was like a book. Everything, big and small, appeared before Grimm's eyes. Even though it was already time to give birth, Aiwa's belly was still not that prominent. Under the exquisite grass-green robes, her delicate and smooth body was covered in beads of sweat. There was a pool of green mucus between her legs, but it was not blood. Even through the robes, Grimm could clearly see Aiwa's belly wriggling from time to time, the little things inside propping it up into a strange shape. As his vision went deeper, Aiwa's flesh and skin gradually became translucent, revealing the strange spore in the pelvic cavity of her abdomen. Looking at her strange appearance, Grimm's mind naturally thought of the spore that had appeared in the records of Magi. It had a humanoid body with eyes, ears, a mouth, a nose and 4 limbs. There was a pair of symmetrical lumps on its back, and deep inside, one could vaguely see a dragonfly's wings curled up into a ball. There might not be any problems with its appearance, but its flesh and blood, its skin and flesh were all grass-green, looking no different from natural plant fibers. On the surface of its skin, the unique plant moss and sporangia of the spore could also be seen everywhere. As for its hands and feet, the ends were also long whip-like rattan tentacles and antennae. At this moment, the little spore seemed to have sensed that it was about to leave its mother's body. From the surface of its body, numerous needle-like tentacles pierced into Aiwa's body, and through them, it frantically absorbed the mother's life energy. And this life energy was not wasted, it was all converted into a huge amount of energy needed to readjust the structure of its body. In Grimm's perception, the little fellow's body was like a boiling construction site. New muscle fibers, internal organs and other flesh and blood tissues were rapidly growing, and even the bones supporting the body were appearing from nothing. And all of this consumed a huge amount of energy absorbed from the mother's body. Go get all the blood crystals and green crystals, and some flesh regeneration potions. Grimm tilted his head and thought for a moment, then took out an elemental crystal core overflowing with a green halo from his flaming bosom and placed it on Aiwa's belly. The moment the green crystal core came into contact with Aiwa's skin, Grimm seemed to hear the joyful cheers of the little life in her stomach. Blood crystals were used to replenish blood energy, and green crystals were crystals formed from the condensation of green plant energy. This elemental crystal core was clearly a rank 2 crystal core, and it was a very rare plant type. With his elemental vision, Grimm could clearly see the direction of the little fellow's evolution and elemental tendencies. Thus, with his targeted replenishment, the sufficient and appropriate energy input also allowed the little fellow to relax its demands on its mother's body. As a result, Aiwa's life force was slowly restored by the huge amount of life potions, and she was able to escape the danger of life backlash. Finally, after suffering for 10 hours, with the shrill cry of a baby, the strange life born from Gargamel and the forest demon Ava was born. This was a very beautiful and charming human girl. She had just been born, but she already looked like a human baby of 2 or 3 years old. She had a pink face, dark red skin, beautiful and raised eyelashes, and a head of curled and slightly damp golden hair. When Meryl wiped off the green mucus on her body and handed it to Aiwa, the little girl even let out a joyful laugh. In her small hand, she was still holding onto the grade 2 green crystal core. Although the Magi who had gathered around did not have the strange ability to see through other people's bodies like Grimm did, they were well aware of the strangeness of this little girl. A little fellow that had just been born already knew how to disguise herself and make herself more likable. This in itself was very telling. However, everyone pretended to be confused, and all of them were full of smiles as they congratulated Gargamel and Aiwa, turning a blind eye to the little girl's strangeness. After putting down the gifts, the Magi took their leave. When Grimm was about to leave, the grateful Gargamel personally sent him to the door. "Master, is there any problem with my child?" Before they parted, Gargamel secretly contacted Grimm without a change in expression. She has your and AI's life imprints on her body. That's enough. Grimm's answer was simple and clear, and at the same time had a profound meaning. Gargamel lowered his head in thought, silently nodding in agreement with his master's opinion. From the strangeness of the entire birth, it could be seen that the origin of this little girl was really suspicious. However, as Grimm said, as long as the blood flowing in her body was his and AI's blood, then there was no need to care about such a small flaw. When only Gargamel and the forest demon AI were left in the secret room, the forest demon AI pulled Gargamel over and stared deeply into his eyes. "This is our child." AI's words were firm and solemn. "This is our child," Gargamel solemnly promised. After receiving Gargamel's guarantee, AI finally felt at ease and placed the little girl in Gargamel's arms. Blinking her beautiful green eyes, the little girl smiled sweetly at Gargamel. Feeling the strong aura of the bloodline, Gargamel's gloomy and withered old face finally revealed a sweet smile, and he tightly held the little girl in his arms. However, immediately after, he felt a sharp pain in his chest from a hard object. Looking down, he saw that it was the rank 2 plant-type crystal core that the little girl was tightly holding onto. "Little baby, can you return this thing to Master? Another day, I'll find a lot of things like this for you, okay?" Feeling the surging elemental energy inside the rank 2 crystal core, Gargamel couldn't help but want to take it away. Who knew that his action would immediately cause the little girl to cry, and her little face also collapsed. Okay. You keep this thing first. When you're tired of playing with it, you can give it to me," Gargamel hurriedly said, making the little girl smile again. Gargamel helplessly let out a bitter smile. Returning to his laboratory, Grimm took out a small reagent bottle and placed a portion of the green mucus he had just quietly ingested into it. Although he had not yet carried out the most sophisticated witchcraft tests and experiments, Grimm dared to pat his chest and guarantee that the baby girl born from Gargamel and AI was definitely the legendary spore person. After ruling out the possibility of a mutant invasion, Grimm had reason to suspect the true identity of the forest demon. If the forest demon AI was not parasitized, then the only possibility was that the source of her bloodline was most likely a spore person from the underground world. Chapter 487. Grimm, Human, Elemental Conversion. Male, Grade 1 Elemental Magus. Strength, 9 Agility, 7 Vitality, 11 Spirit, 20. Status, Healthy. Note: stats have reached the genetic limit. After 67 years of hard training, Grimm had finally completed his elemental conversion and achieved a perfect fusion with his elemental body. However, this also meant that he had almost exhausted all of his potential. If he did not find a way to advance and achieve a qualitative change, it would be hard for him to advance even if he ate dragon liver and phoenix marrow every day for the next 100 to 200 years. The perfect fusion between his body and spirit allowed him to achieve an exquisite balance, forming a system of life energy circulation within his body. What made him most gratified was that Grimm had taken advantage of the training of his body and spirit to integrate the heart of the fire demon into this system, turning it into the core of his body that pushed for continuous evolution. This way, even in areas where elemental energy was scarce, his body would become an inextinguishable furnace that could continuously produce pure fire energy. According to the AI chip's calculations, even in areas without magic, his fire core could withstand 30 degrees of attack. This also meant that Grimm could continuously cast fire spells of 30 degrees without exhausting his elemental energy reserves, without absorbing any energy from the outside world. If he increased the intensity of the attacks to 70 degrees, which was the boundary between apprentices and magi, Grimm would be able to sustain such attacks for 2 hours. This referred to continuous attacks, with no long intervals in between. If Grimm chose to move around while fighting, the fire core would have time to recover, and the duration of the battle could be extended to a day and a night. The effect of such a sustained battle was shocking, and Grimm had never seen it from any other Grade 1 Magus. Within the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda, the one who could fight the most was the Blood Queen Mary. Her explosive power in close combat was shocking, and she also had the ability to fight for a long time. However, she still needed the support of a large amount of flesh and blood. Once the enemy targeted her flesh and blood, her endurance would be sharply reduced. However, Grimm's fire core was located within his body. It was like a miniature flame altar, able to continuously absorb energy from the fire elemental plane. Furthermore, this connection could not be disrupted by ordinary sealing spells or spell-disrupting runes. It was almost impossible for Grimm's flame energy to run out. Apart from pushing his spirit to the limit of 20 points, Grimm's strength and physique had also reached their limits. 9 points of strength was enough for him to defeat an iron-armored rhinoceros with his bare hands, but unfortunately, he didn't have the talent for close combat, so investing resources and energy in the field of close combat would only result in a greater waste. It was the same for his 11 points of vitality. Such a physique was enough to make him as strong as a berserk monster. The combination of life energy and spiritual will made his skin as tough as thick rhinoceros skin, and his magic and physical resistance were also outstanding. Especially after his physique broke through the threshold of 10 points, he obtained the ability Limb Regeneration. As long as he had enough energy, as long as he wasn't dead, any missing limbs could be regenerated by consuming energy. This was also a basic ability that all high-grade anatomy refinery sorcerers possessed. It was the same for his spirit. Since Grimm had reached the limit of 20 points, he gained the ability Rapid Recovery when his spirit reached 11 points. This allowed his spirit recovery speed to double when he consumed more than half of it. After silently checking himself, Grimm strolled to the biology lab. This place had been transformed into a strange jungle similar to the Black Forest. As soon as he stepped in, a strange insect that looked like a rock scorpion jumped out of the thick grass and climbed up to his shoulder, intimately rubbing his earlobe. Grimm reached out his hand made of flames and gently stroked the back of the insect. It was as tough as cowhide, but its surface was greasy. Even if a normal person grabbed it, it would be difficult for them to exert force. Both sides of its strange, spindle-shaped body had sharp limbs that were as sharp as knives, and its tail was like a bony scorpion tail. At the end of the tail was a poisonous needle that was emitting black mist. This was the first half-mature insect that Grimm had cultivated for dozens of years. It could 100% plunder the gene fragments related to the talent ability of the target creature. However, this insect's individual strength was limited. Even if Grimm had done everything he could to increase its strength, its combat ability was barely on par with a beginner apprentice. This also meant that it was extremely naive to think that it could rely on itself to hunt those top-level magical creatures. Its talent was indeed heaven-defying and terrifying, but the world was fair. The world had given it a heaven-defying talent, but at the same time, it had also given it a weak body. Those top-level magical creatures all had terrifying elemental auras. Creatures like the insects could not even get close to them before they would be crushed by the terrifying mental pressure or elemental shock. Therefore, if Grimm wanted to obtain the dragon's bloodline, he had to first capture a dragon and tie it up, then respectfully bring it to the insect and let it invade it. During this process, he also had to be careful that a dragon's sneeze could kill the insect. In summary, this kind of insect could not be mass-produced. Even if it could be mass-produced, it would not be easy to achieve his dream of obtaining a powerful talent. The genetic capacity of the human body was limited. Grimm's Fire Wizard talent had already taken up more than half of the capacity, so the space left for foreign genes was still limited. If he randomly added a large number of rubbish abilities, It would cause the contamination of his own talent, or even cause the collapse of his genetic chain. Therefore, Grimm did not want any rubbish abilities. He had to carefully choose the most suitable and perfect talent for himself. This undoubtedly required a lot of time and luck. After playing with Grimm for a while, it was time to feed. 3 holes the size of a human head suddenly appeared on the ceiling of the secret room. Then, a dozen snow rabbits unique to the Black Forest were thrown out. These were wild rabbits with short snow-white fur and black eyes. They were very good at running short distances. The previously docile and peaceful insect instantly became fierce and cruel. It used its sharp limbs to push off Grimm's shoulder and flew into the air. While its body was still rolling in the air, the scorpion's stinger on its tail had already shot into the forest and accurately hit a snow rabbit that had just landed. The snow rabbit had just landed, but before it could adjust its body suddenly trembled and it fell to the ground. It was so numb that it could not move. The strange sounds of limbs scraping the ground in the forest were as dense as rain. A dozen insects that were slightly smaller than the previous ones jumped out of the grass and went straight for the snow rabbit. Meanwhile, mutated insect number 1 landed beside the snow rabbit first and quickly climbed onto its body. Then, it stood up and flashed its terrifying pincers in all directions. The dozen small insects surrounded the snow rabbit and kept probing, but every time they were scared away by insect number 1's fierce insect pincers. They had no choice. After hesitating for a moment, they could only turn around and pounce on the other side of the forest to chase the 2 snow rabbit. Only then did strange insect number 1 start to gorge himself in satisfaction. Silently observing from afar, Grimm was delighted to find that insect number 1's strength and speed had increased slightly. This made him feel extremely gratified. Since these insects had been implanted with control runes and Grimm's consciousness when they were hatched, there was no need to worry about them turning on their master after they became stronger. This was the reason why Grimm dared to keep them in captivity. After observing the insects' lives for a while and making sure there were no accidents, Grimm left the biology lab and went to his alchemy lab. On the small alchemy table in the middle of the lab were 3 magic puppet cores and 5 dazzling grade 2 elemental cores. These were all the cores he had obtained after working hard for the Cerubo family for so long. To be honest, Grimm should have obtained 10 grade 2 elemental cores, but 2 of them had failed to make magic puppet. As a result, there were only 3 demon puppet crystal cores left in his hands, and they were all peak elite demon puppet crystal cores. The remaining 5 grade 2 elemental cores were of the earth element, which he had purposely kept to make grade 2 magic puppet. Before becoming a grade 2 magus, he was limited by his own strength, so the maximum attack power of the magic puppets he made was 185 degrees. Although it was only a step away from the 200 degrees attack of a grade 2 magus, the difference was like heaven and earth. For any grade 1 magus, be it flesh or elemental creatures, the upper limit of 200 degrees of attack was something they would never be able to break. However, for grade 2 magi, 200 degrees was only the basic strength of their attacks, which was also the lower limit of their attacks. As long as they did not intentionally want to reduce the power of their attacks, a grade 2 magus could easily cast a spell with a power of more than 200 degrees. As for the legendary grade 3 magi, their attacks could easily reach up to 1,000 degrees, far surpassing that of grade 2 magi. In the magus world, the difference between the ranks of creatures was only 1 rank, but the difference in strength could be 5 to 10 times. Hence, killing creatures of a higher rank could only happen under certain extreme conditions. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible for a low-ranked creature to defeat a high-ranked one. This was the true reason why magi divided the ranks of creatures. Chapter 488. After 67 years of training, Grimm was only 1 step away from reaching rank 2. However, this step felt like it was so close yet so far away. If he could not overcome this obstacle, his mind would wither due to the backlash from the ritual. When the body's potential was exhausted, it would be very difficult to recover from such an injury. In the sorcerer world, there were as many rank 1 sorcerers as there were hairs on a cow. Even in the central continent, there were easily 20 to 30,000 rank 1 sorcerers. The 3 major sorcerer organizations were even more powerful than the central continent. In the entire sorcerer world, there were definitely more than 100,000 sorcerers. Among these 100,000 sorcerers, no more than 2,000 could successfully advance to rank 2. Among these 2,000 rank 2 sorcerers, less than 300 could advance to rank 3. As for rank 4 sorcerers, they were ranked below 50. With such a harsh environment for advancement, how could the sorcerer world still become the overlord of the plane world? It relied on the accumulation of years and years. As long as the sorcerer inheritance system was complete and there were sufficient sorcerers, there would always be rank 4 sorcerers. Even great sorcerers that surpassed rank 4 would appear. As sorcerers grew stronger, the lifespan of high-grade sorcerers would also increase exponentially. Due to different races, different spells, and different directions of evolution, the lifespan of sorcerers was not fixed. However, for a long time, the sorcerer system had a rough range based on human sorcerers. The basic lifespan of an ordinary human in the sorcerer world was about 120 years, while the lifespan of a rank 1 sorcerer was between 200 to 300 years. The lifespan of a rank 2 sorcerer was between 300 to 500 years. The lifespan of a rank 3 sorcerer was between 700 to 800 years, and the lifespan of a rank 4 sorcerer was over 1,000 years. This was just a simple estimate. Due to the differences in races and the erosion of witchcraft energy, the lifespan of an individual would fluctuate quite a bit. Take Mary for example. Although she was only a rank 1 sorcerer, she walked the vampire branch of the bloodline sorcerers. The vampires were known as the typical long-lived species, so it was not a problem for them to live for 700 to 800 years. Sabrina, the mechanical sorcerer under Grimm, belonged to the mechanical branch of the bloodline sorcerers. Since the corrosion of the mechanical branch of the bloodline sorcerers had to be maintained by a large amount of mediators, their lifespan would be 1/3 or 1/4 of that of ordinary sorcerers. However, it was worth it to exchange it for a powerful attack. As for a wizard like Grimm, if he didn't find a way to increase his elemental affinity after becoming a wizard, he would inevitably erode his life energy system after using the magic elements for a long time. Therefore, the elemental incarnation was the only way for them to avoid the erosion of the element. However, most wizards only completed their elemental conversion after they became wizards, so their basic lifespan was obviously not as long as Grimm, who completed his elemental conversion during his apprenticeship. Advancing from Tier 1 to Tier 2 was more of a transformation from an elemental controller to a law controller. Perhaps Tier 1 sorcerers were still using their personal talents and sorcery abilities to attract the wandering elemental energy in the air to achieve the effect of amplifying the power of sorcery. Rank 2 magi, on the other hand, relied more on the power of the laws of the plane to tilt the elemental energy in the target area. However, the laws of the plane that a Tier 2 magus could come into contact with were very shallow, and they could not be considered as true controllers of laws. Even those Tier 3 wizards were only slightly better than Tier 2 wizard. They had yet to reach the level of proficiency. On the sorcerer continent, only Tier 4 wizards could be considered as a group of people who could truly control the laws of the plane. Tier 5 wizards, on the other hand, had already jumped out of the shackles of the plane and had a deeper understanding of the world's laws. From Tier 5 wizards onwards, they had the right to call themselves law-defying wizard. Below Tier 5 wizards, from Tier 1 to Tier 4 wizards, could only call themselves elemental wizard. However, with the gradual development of the sorcerer world, the basic strength of the current Tier 4 wizards was also steadily increasing. Many wizards had already begun to categorize them as law-defying wizards, whether intentionally or unintentionally. It was precisely because of the huge difference in strength between each rank in the sorcerer world that no wizard had a 100% chance of success in their advancement ceremony. Failing to advance would only result in damage to the wizard's spiritual origin and the withering of their spiritual force. Although this could be recovered after a long period of recuperation, the psychological impact on the wizard's mind was unprecedented. Moreover, a wizard's lifespan was limited. Even if everything went smoothly, it would not give them enough time to repeatedly break through to the next rank. This was why the main reason why the wizard families favored the young wizards so much was because they had the capital to start all over again. Therefore, even though he had reached the threshold of advancing to Tier 2, Grimm was still very calm and collected the necessary resources and knowledge, striving to increase the success rate of his advancement. Right now, his biggest advantage was that after such a long period of sorting and summarizing, he had successfully analyzed the 28 strange runes he brought back from the Night Plane. Among them, the most useful to him were the 3 runes related to the fire element. Variant Fire Rune, Explosion. Rare Fire Rune, Cold Flame. Rare Fire Rune, Poison Flame. The Explosion rune, just like its name, could really explode. As long as it was an area rich in fire elements, Grimm's spiritual force would sweep through it and it would explode like an elemental fireball. The Cold Flame rune, on the other hand, was a type of ingenious use of fire energy. When the caster tried to extract the heat from the elemental flame, the internal temperature of the flame would drop to -200 degrees Celsius. Under such circumstances, although it was still a flame, it could create a strange freezing effect. Grimm's tests also showed that the Cold Flame rune had a higher penetrating power and magic penetration than the high-temperature flames. It was more suitable for breaking elemental defenses and energy shield. The Poison Flame rune, on the other hand, mixed a trace of strange energy into the elemental flames, creating a flame effect similar to poison. This poison was different from ordinary biological, plant, mineral, or other poisons. It was a type of energy poison. As long as the target could not stop the flow of energy in their body, they would not be able to stop the spread of the energy poison. For those who lacked the means to deal with it, the energy poison was almost unsolvable. These runes had already been etched into Grimm's core of consciousness. Even though Grimm's understanding of them was still very primitive and ignorant, it did not stop him from using them as he pleased. The reason for this situation was entirely due to the AI chip. To be honest, the person who had completely understood these runes was not Grimm, but the AI chip. Grimm was just a capitalist who had stolen the fruits of the AI chip's labor. Grimm could only recite the information that the AI chip had sent to his brain to read out the runic knowledge represented by each stroke of the runes. However, the true meaning behind these runes and the insights he had gained from the analysis were abstract and illusory. It was difficult to describe them with simple words. The fusion of the 3 fire runes allowed Grimm to see 3 different fire lineages: Explosion, Cold Flame, and Poison Flame. The appearance of each lineage greatly enriched Grimm's fire spells and the effects of his attacks. After advancing to rank 2, Grimm would even take some time to create a complete list of spells for each lineage. This way, Grimm had created 3 different fire wizard profession systems at the same time, and the feedback he would receive from the plane would be very impressive. Apart from the fire runes, Grimm also had 25 other runes from other lineages, all of which were precious knowledge of the same grade. In view of their great support for Magi, Grimm had chosen to give some of them to the Magi of his faction. Alice, who was in the Tower of Destiny in the north, had obtained the Dream Rune, which gave her the strange ability to control other people's dreams. The Poison Centipede, Ender, had obtained the Poison Rune. This way, when her poison spells were dispelled or healed, she would be able to instantly release all the damage she had accumulated. This kind of rune effect was the best to deal with those who did not know what was going on. The Blood Queen Mary was even more amazing. She had obtained the Phantom and Shadow Strike runes. The Phantom rune allowed Mary to create 2 phantoms when she moved at high speed. Each phantom lasted for 3 seconds and had 35% of Mary's attack power. The cooldown time of the skill was 7 seconds. The Shadow Strike rune allowed Mary to add a shadow attack when she attacked an enemy. This way, Mary's attacks would have a blood and shadow attack. If she added a physical attack, it would be a triple attribute attack. Although the attack power was not that much higher, it was still very difficult to deal with. After all, shadow attacks could ignore defense most of the time. Meryl was a typical academic wizard. She was not good at fighting, so he could not find a suitable rune for her. Grimm could only give her the Wisdom rune. This way, she would have a photographic memory and the ability to obtain clues at any time. In fact, this ability was very effective in appraising strange items. No matter what item fell into her hands, as long as she stared at it for more than 5 seconds, she would be able to get a vague hint of information from the plane's law. She was basically an appraiser with a cheat code. Grimm's specialty was herbology, and he was good at concocting potions. This was why he gave him the Decomposition rune. This rune could decompose any spell material into smaller and purer energy crystals. However, this process required the help of an alchemy lab and a rune circle, so it could not be used in battle. Chapter 489. Cabby was in a terrible mood today. After more than 60 years of separation, his master had finally summoned him again. The meeting was still warm and enthusiastic, but when he returned to his goblin shop, Cabby suddenly became depressed. After a simple inspection of the shop, he looked at the acolytes who bowed and bowed in front of him, not daring to breathe too loudly. Then he looked at the 3 magi who were already waiting in the shop. Suddenly, the gnome Cabby lost the pride and arrogance he had in the past. After sending them away with a few words, he returned to the secret room at the back of the shop, lying on his favorite chair and staring blankly at the ceiling. His master was still his master. After more than 60 years, his master's face was exactly the same as it was 60 years ago, as if the passage of time had not left any traces on his body. And he, Cabby, crawled up and ran to the mercury mirror in the corner of the room, carefully inspecting his appearance. Rough green skin was loosely piled on his body, the once glossy green skin now dull and lifeless. His previously ugly face was still ugly, but apart from the ugliness, one could faintly see signs of old age and weakness. Green goblins were just too ugly, so the humans around him wouldn't carefully size him up. Even the magi that had a request for him spoke to him amiably, but in their hearts, they were full of disdain and disdain. In their eyes, goblins were often associated with stupid, slaves, and experimental materials. They didn't deserve to be called intelligent creatures. If it wasn't for the fact that they wanted to get their hands on the Magus rank magic puppets that the shop regularly released, these arrogant magi wouldn't even be willing to approach him, let alone lower their heads and beg him. In the past, the goblin Cabby had always enjoyed the scene of being on equal footing with these magi. He always squinted his eyes, crossed his legs, and listened to their stiff and dry flattery and praise without batting an eyelid. But today, for some reason, the goblin Cabby had suddenly lost interest in all of this. Lying in front of the mercury mirror that could completely reflect his appearance, Cabby looked left and right, and finally had to admit that he was old. As a lowly goblin, his basic lifespan was much shorter than a human's, at most 60 to 80 years. In the cruel environment of the natural world, most gnomes would be considered old if they could live to 30 years old. Most gnome tribes couldn't afford to raise old gnomes who had lost their fighting abilities. So once a gnome was over 30 years old and entered the middle and late stages of his life, he wouldn't be far from being abandoned by the tribe. His carefree and blissful life had made Cabby forget that he was a gnome. But after meeting his master today, and seeing his master's youthful appearance, Kobe realized this point once again. Although it was a strange goblin that had been modified by sorcerers using witchcraft, in terms of vitality, it was already a Tier 1 magical creature. This would undoubtedly double its basic lifespan. However, the gnome's basic lifespan was too low. Even if it was doubled, it would only be around 140 to 150 years. And to put it bluntly, after its master went into seclusion once, it was already halfway through its life. In most gnome tribes, he was on the verge of being eliminated. A tinge of sorrow and fear floated in his heart for no reason. The goblin cabbie started pacing around the secret room in frustration. This was a high-level magus world. This was the omnipotent magus world. Could it be that, as a noble gnome merchant, he couldn't find a way to extend the life of a gnome here? After flipping through countless books on witchcraft and calling in a few apprentices to ask about it, the goblin cabbie painfully discovered that even in the magus world, extending one's life was a costly and extravagant act. As for the more popular life extension rituals among the magi, they could be split into low, mid, and high grade. The low grade could extend one's life by 50 years, the mid grade could extend it by 300 years, and the high grade could extend it by 1,000 years. As for their prices, they were naturally the same as their effect. It was depressing to the point that one would want to rob a wizard's pagoda. Other than the price, the life extension ritual also required many rare resources, most of which were hard to find in the magus world. Just gathering the resources would probably cost an astronomical figure. Even if one managed to gather all the resources, they would still need to hire a high-level magus to preside over the ritual. This was a huge sum that an ordinary magus would not even dare imagine. Thus, according to Cabbie's understanding, the low-grade life extension ritual would cost around 700,000 to 800,000 magic crystals, the mid-grade around 5 million magic crystals, and the high grade was almost priceless with Cabbie's savings over the years. In addition to helping Grimm's master manage the shop, he had also accumulated some private stash, about 150 to 60,000 magic crystals. In the past, it had always been proud of its hard work and ability. But now, after comparing the two, he had suddenly lost the motivation to work hard. He felt that everything in front of him was like a bubble that would burst with a gentle poke. When he was young, no one would think of death directly. But after enjoying the glory and prosperity, the goblin cabbie felt that he could not leave all of this. Every day, he would patrol his gnome shop, enjoying the subservience of the apprentices, listening to the subservience of the magi. Such days were blissful. But now Cabbie had a terrifying feeling that he was walking towards death. I must become someone useful to my master. Cabbie swore fiercely. That night, the gnome cabbie contacted the gnome Grand Duke, Gaz Ruvi, who was far away in another dimension. Then, a large batch of magic stones was sent to the gnome dimension through a transaction. Of course, there was also a seemingly inconspicuous little silver ore mixed in with this batch of magic ores. The specks of silver dust inside were covered by the thick ore. Its weak energy undulations were mixed in with the rich aura of the magic crystals, making it impossible for the weak perception of the gnomes to detect it. The bait had already been cast, and all that was left was to wait for the other party to take the bait. Grimm wasn't surprised by Kobe's earnest suggestion. It was a green goblin, and Gaz Ruvi, who was far away in another dimension, was also a green goblin. Although the two of them shared the same origin, they did not have any blood ties or familial ties, so they did not have the burden of betraying their own kind. Moreover, with the fickleness of goblins, Grimm was already surprised that Cabbie had taken so long to make a move. But no matter what Cabbie's initial motive was, the only thing he cared about was sending the mixed gift. As for the longevity that Cabbie dreamed about, Grimm had agreed to it without thinking. Cabbie still had 70 to 80 years to live, and it would not be too late to consider this problem after the gnome plane fell into his hands. Life extension ritual? That was too expensive, and it often required strange items such as dragon bones, dragon saliva grass, and hydra eggs. Even Grimm did not have the confidence to find these things. So, when Cabby was about to die, it was not a bad idea to turn him into a spirit or a wizard beast. His lifespan would definitely be extended. Of course, he could let Mary embrace him and turn him into a blood-sucking gnome. But the blood of a gnome was so smelly, whether Mary would be willing to bite him was a problem. After dealing with all the matters at hand, Grimm strolled into a secret room. The secret chamber was empty, and there was only a complicated and mysterious sorcerer formation carved in the center. When Grimm stepped into it, the wizard's pagoda immediately channeled a large amount of energy into the wizard formation. Countless wizard runes and magical lines silently appeared in the air, and a majestic wizard formation enveloped the entire secret room. The secret chamber immediately became dark and lightless. At the same time, within the Tower of Destiny in the north, the astrology platform at the top of the Tower of Destiny suddenly released a dark fog, engulfing the entire space at lightning speed. A graceful figure was silently standing in the darkness, looking up at the twinkling stars in the sky. A river of stars twinkled in the sky. In this beautiful world of stars, Alice's graceful figure seemed so lonely, so cold. Even her face was wet with tears. A tall figure hugged her from behind, gently wiping away the 2 streams of tears that had just rolled down her cheeks. What are you feeling sad about? If you're thinking too much, you can directly teleport to the blazing flame monarch. Don't always hide here and grieve by yourself. Grimm's voice came from the tall figure, but it was obvious that this body was not a real body, but some kind of strange wizard technique that projected his consciousness. Alice squeezed back, letting Grimm hug her tightly, but did not say anything. Over the years, she had always been that ice-cold, divine-like prophet in front of outsiders, the Witch of Destiny Alice who was always shrouded in a mysterious veil. But only she knew that every time she stood on the astrology platform, she could clearly sense the majestic and unceasing torrent of destiny. In the eyes of outsiders, the Witches of Destiny were mighty beings that controlled the river of destiny. Even she herself had been lost beneath the mysterious and unfathomable power of destiny when she'd just come into contact with it. But the deeper she immersed herself in the river of destiny, the more she felt powerless and weak. Every time she explored the river of destiny, it was no less than a risk, and it was a risk that she was completely unprepared for. The river of destiny was not unchanging. In the vast and boundless Magus world, the number of powerhouses that had the ability to stretch their tentacles into the river of destiny were as many as the hairs on a cow. Their existence was a disaster for Alice. These fellows used their own strength to stir up torrents in the river of destiny without the slightest scruple, intercepting the river of destiny as they pleased and directing it in the direction they desired. Chapter 490. Of course, the river of destiny had no consciousness. Hence, these roars and howls were mostly emotions transmitted by the world will through the laws of the world. Every world had its own laws and rules. Only when everything operated according to the laws would the world be complete and healthy. However, within this world, there were too many powerful existences that used their strength to interfere with the operation of the world, forcing the world will to make concessions for their own convenience. This was something the world will would not allow. Hence, on another level of the Magus world that all living beings were unable to pry into, a magnificent battle was going on at every moment. The river of fate that Alice entered every day was in such a strange state, and it also brought Alice endless unexpected dangers. Compared to those almighty beings, Alice's strength was too weak. Her strength was not even worth mentioning in front of them. Hence, when the other party stirred up a huge wave in the river of destiny, they might be able to easily escape unscathed. However, for Alice, who only had the strength of a rank 1 expert, not being able to evade in time would lead to the tragic fate of eternity. Those who had never experienced the mighty power of the River of Destiny would never be able to imagine the grandeur of the power of destiny gathered by a large-scale world. Meanwhile, aside from Tier 4 sorcerers, there was no one else capable of wreaking havoc in this world. If Alice did not have the protection of the Destiny Witch, with her strength of a rank 1 magus, she would have been assimilated by the mighty current the moment she came into contact with the River of Destiny. Unlike the rank 4 magi who stirred up trouble, Alice was now more like a rowboat, shuttling back and forth between the raging winds and huge waves. One wrong move and the boat would be destroyed and everyone on board would perish. Don't look down on the fact that the River of Fate is a hidden existence, a manifestation of the natural laws. If you die in it, everything you represent will vanish into thin air. If you died in the outside world, then so be it. At least your corpse would still be there. At least your family, friends, and lover would still remember you. However, if you were to die in the River of Destiny, then sorry, but the symbol that your name represented would be completely erased by the power of laws. In the sorcerer world, you will disappear, and no one will remember your name. Even the traces of your past in the sorcerer world will disappear. From the beginning to the end, you have never appeared, and the symbol that you represent will also be removed. As for you, you will become an existence that has never existed, but has indeed existed. It could be imagined that with weak strength, it would be difficult to survive in such a dangerous environment if one did not have a heart as hard as a rock. During the 67 long years, although Grimm's life was hard, he was safe and sound. But Grimm hugged Alice tightly in his arms, using his soul to warm her heart. He lowered his head and gently caressed Alice's silky silver hair with his chin. She was only less than 100 years old, but Alice's long silver hair was already mostly white. Looking down, one could even see the wrinkled skin and wrinkles at the corner of her eyes and the tip of her eyebrows. The witches of destiny chased after destiny every day, but they often had no control over their own destiny. In the River of Destiny on the world level, even the best witchcraft equipment could not be brought in. The only thing that could unleash its power in there was the power of origin in her soul. This kind of power would decrease with each use, and there was almost no external way to replenish it. Therefore, if Alice wanted to change the future she glimpsed in the River of Destiny, the only thing she could use was her own life. She used the method of burning her life to create a series of fate nodes, and then used the accidents to attack the solidified future. In order to save Poison Centipede Ender, Alice had to first set up fate nodes in the River of Destiny, then return to the sorcerer world and rely on the efforts of Grimm, Mary, and the others to change the direction of these fate nodes. Only then could she achieve the power to attack the original future. Therefore, in order to freely control the River of Destiny, apart from Alice's own power of destiny, she also needed a powerful force that could completely carry out her will. Only by working together from the inside and outside could she possibly direct the tributary of fate in the direction she wanted. And in this process, Alice had to pay with her own life force. Alice was a very young witch. According to normal circumstances, she had only gone through 1/4 of a wizard's life. However, the signs of aging on her face indicated that she had entered the middle and late stages of her life. Wizards were high-energy creatures that evolved from humans. Although they could not get rid of the inferior senses and life system of humans, they could still use witchcraft energy to slow down the aging of the body. In many cases, wizards could even pay a certain price to solidify their appearance and figure at a certain time. As long as there was no shortage of witchcraft energy, as long as the life system did not decline, they would never grow old. If a wizard suddenly showed obvious signs of aging, it was mostly because they had entered the later stages of their life, and their own witchcraft energy was no longer enough to support a complete life system. Now that Alice was also showing signs of aging, Grimm could totally imagine the torment and pain she had suffered during this period of time. How much longer? Grim pulled Alice over and stared into her blue eyes. How long do you have left to live? He asked softly. 54 years, 7 months, and 3 days. Why is it 20 years less than the last time? You? Grim was stunned for a moment before he understood what was going on. This is the first time you've started a planar war. It's very important to you and me, so I have to ensure its success. Alice's words were resolute and decisive. Although she was a weak woman, her speech and behavior still carried the unique pride and reservation of a superior. Do you see the victory? Grim cupped her face in his hands with pity. You're an idiot again. Alice rolled her eyes. That's a different plane. My power of destiny can't reach there. I only saw your existence in the future of the sorcerer world. That's right. Since I can still exist in the future of the sorcerer world, it means I didn't die in the other plane. This is good news. Grim thought quietly. Finally, he lowered his face and pressed his lips on Alice's. There was a soft sound. Black smoke spread out from the spell formation. Grim coughed lightly as he walked out. There was a small bite mark on his lower lip. We've been talking about love for so long, but she's still so shy. He actually dispersed the smoke and sent his consciousness back. Woo woo woo, why does this bite mark hurt so much? Did that girl cast some kind of special curse on me? Grim rolled his eyes. His body flashed and reappeared 5 steps away. During this process of teleporting, he had already reconstructed his body with flames. Using this method, he could almost get rid of most of the injuries and curses on the surface of his body. But strangely, when he reappeared 5 steps away, Grim touched his lips and froze. Damn it, the bite mark is still there. Alice, that lass, had really made a fool out of herself. How could he face others now? Grim wailed silently. He could only conjure a golden mask with flames and put it on his face. Although it was a little strange, it was much better than being laughed at by Mary. After returning to his residence, Grim could not help but start checking his magic equipment again. The destructive flames wizard's staff could effectively increase the power of fire spells, and it also had the effect of burning souls. He could continue to use it even after reaching grade 2, so he did not need to think about changing it. The 3 Ein stones were unavoidably laid off. Once Grim became a Tier 2 wizard, their little buffs would not affect him in the slightest. Keeping them around would only serve as a way to show off. As for the rest of the magic equipment, they would all have to be eliminated. Their power could not match up to Grim's current strength. Among all the equipment, the only one that Grim was most satisfied with was the soul equipment secret voodoo scroll. As a soul equipment that had followed Grim since he was an apprentice, it was also a companion type of magic equipment. It could absorb the power of the host's soul to continuously strengthen itself. Of course, the process of strengthening also required a lot of rare resources and magic materials. In the past, Grim knew nothing about these things, and he did not know where to start. However, after analyzing the inscription of knowledge that Mary and the others brought back from the boneyard, he had a clear and definite clue. Grim thought for a bit, and the magic book that was hanging by his waist suddenly appeared in his hand. Touching the hard cover of the thick book, Grim could feel an obscure power slowly flowing inside. This power was not elemental energy, nor was it magic power. Instead, it was similar to the soul waves of a spiritual consciousness. Grim opened the cover, and the pages inside were all fused together, leaving only one page. On it was a strange hexagram array, and each of the 6 protruding horns was embedded with a giant emerald. In the middle of the array, there was a strange creature that looked like a wooden doll slowly wriggling. Even though it was on a flat page, it still gave people the feeling that it was alive. Looking at the strange array and the strange creature, Grim could not help but sigh. If he wanted to evolve the secret voodoo scroll, he would need to use the appropriate gemstones to strengthen its body. 6 giant emeralds might not be a big deal to Grim now, but the rate at which he was consuming 6 emeralds every month was something that even Grimm could not help but feel shocked. After feeding on the emeralds for a full 10 years, the voodoo puppet in the secret voodoo scroll finally formed a body. If he wanted to turn it into a plague poison spirit, he would need a lot of flesh and life. Chapter 491. The evolution of the secret voodoo poison scroll was both a blessing and a curse. The blessing was that Grimm would be able to obtain a spell contract spirit that was on par with him. Whether it was the voodoo puppet or the plague poison spirit, the power they could display was closely related to the strength of his soul. The curse was that the pages of the secret voodoo poison scroll had merged into one, and the 6 spell storage slots had disappeared. This also meant that he would no longer be able to borrow free instant cast spells in battle. Moreover, the secret voodoo poison scroll was tightly bound to Grimm's soul, so it could completely help him resist control spells. It could also help him increase his resistance against mental spells. In any case, the benefits of the secret voodoo poison scroll outweighed the disadvantages. Grimm's heart sank as he sensed the thick aura of the voodoo poison scroll in his hand. Everything was ready, and all that was left was the final push. Now, everything was ready, and all the matters at hand were at a standstill. They were all waiting for a result that could connect all the threads and all the matters. Advance to rank 2. Only by advancing to rank 2 would Grimm be able to display his strength and potential to the Magi in the camp. Only then would he be able to give them a reason and excuse to follow him. Otherwise, he would never be able to shake off the impression that he was a schemer who used tricks to climb to a high position. He wanted to be a leader, not a troublesome schemer. That was why he had to first prove himself before mobilizing the strength of the camp to follow him through fire and water. He had to prove that he was strong, that he had great potential, and that he had foresight that ordinary people did not have. There was nothing more shocking than being a rank 2 magus. Moreover, he was not even 100 years old, which meant that he had enough strength and time to advance to rank 3. Was there a better and wiser choice than to follow a powerful sorcerer who was on his way to becoming a rising sorcerer? Not only was this a way to build confidence for his followers, it was also a way to strengthen his own confidence. It was time to advance. Just as Grimm was silently preparing for his advancement, a discussion about his fate was underway in Fedinan City, tens of thousands of miles away. Fedinan City, 17th floor of the Magus Tower. It was still the personal residence of the rank 3 Magus, Senazar. Only 3 people could participate in this meeting: Senazar, Forgan, and Korgan. The 3 core magi represented the interests of the 3 classes, and they were the core strength that determined the future development of the Salubo family in the Magus world. Unfortunately, they'd obviously encountered a problem that gave them a headache today. Has the previous information been verified? Lady Senazar was still hidden in the purple mist, and her familiar voice could only be heard through the thick mist. Has that kid really reached the threshold of breaking through to grade 2? Forgan nodded silently. As a veteran rank 2 magus, he naturally knew how dangerous the process of advancing to rank 2 was. Even if that brat really reached the pinnacle of grade 1, the success rate in one attempt would not exceed 27%. Furthermore, that lad had been hiding within the wizard's pagoda all these years, not taking a single step out. He had almost never had the chance to gather the rare resources that could assist him in his advancement. This also eliminated the possibility of the other party taking advantage of the situation. If Abel still chose to force his way through under these circumstances, Wizard Forgan couldn't help but admire his ruthlessness and decisiveness. He might have gotten help from outside. Although in a situation like this, most of the time he only had the power to listen and execute, Wizard Korgan hesitated for a moment and finally voiced out his conjecture. Wizard Forgan raised his head and looked at Korgan. "Are you talking about the Destiny Witches?" "Yes." After thinking for a moment, Wizard Forgan couldn't help but nod. Lady Senazar, I also suspect that the brat has gotten help from the Destiny Witches. Otherwise, he wouldn't have tried it so recklessly. After all, with the basic lifespan of a magus, it's impossible for them to break through to grade 2 more than 3 times. This is something that everyone knows. What we need to worry about right now is not why he chose to break through to grade 2 at this time, but the attitude of the family towards him. Lady Senazar was indeed a rank 3 magus who had lived for 600 years. Although she rarely paid attention to the internal affairs of the family, she was still able to see the core of the problem. That's right, Abel had been hiding the progress of his strength all this time, and did not ask for any resources from the family for the advancement ceremony. This was enough to explain the problem. It seemed like the 60 years of forbearance did not make him give up on the idea of leaving the family. Furthermore, outside of the family's detection, that brat had already pushed his mental force to the threshold of 20 points in such a short amount of time. This was simply inconceivable. Even Wizard Forgan, who was known as a genius in training, had spent 157 years to push his mental force to the limit of 20 points. Abel, on the other hand, did not rely on any of the family's power, and did it in that remote place. If it was not for the fact that the spy planted by the clan sent back the news in time, the few of them would not have received the news until the other party had successfully made a breakthrough. At that time, they would no longer have the initiative. Rank 2. Rank 2 Magus. With this kind of strength, he would be able to get a good position no matter where he went. In some extreme cases, a rank 2 Magus could even establish his own family and revive the family. Also, wasn't that what that brat had been doing in the place called the Flame Monarch? A small low-level wizard's pagoda had gathered 8 to 9 core magi and 10 to 20 outer magi. Wasn't this the prototype of a small family? If he really succeeded in advancing and gathered all his resources and subordinates as a rank 2 magus, leaving the Salubo family would be a piece of cake. After all, the Salubo family did not have any rank 4 magi on the wizard continent. If they wanted to suppress a rank 2 magus with a private wizard's pagoda with just their rank 3 Lord Senazar, it would probably cause an earth-shattering internal war within the family. Once things got out of hand, and the internal war could not be settled quickly, the Salubo family would only be one step away from falling. It was precisely because they had foreseen such a terrible situation that the 3 core members of the Salubo family had gathered together to seriously discuss the various possibilities. First, I believe that Grimm's advancement to rank 2 will do more harm than good to the family. It could easily cause a split in the family. So, we have to think of a way to stop him from advancing. At the very least, we have to think of a way to stop his first attempt to advance. Senazar thought for a moment and finally made up his mind. Forgan, do you have the exact time of his advancement ceremony? It should be in 3 months' time. Forgan replied resolutely. According to the information from the other side, a batch of precious resources from the Blazing Flame Monarch will arrive in 3 months. I've already looked through the list of resources, and there are many things needed for the advancement ceremony. That's good. Senazar was gratified. This means that we still have time to work and intervene. Forgan, immediately contact Purple Eye in the Deepwater world and get him to issue a recruitment order in the name of suppressing the rebellion. Then, arrange for Grimm to bring some men to the Deepwater world to carry out the family's compulsory mission. The Deepwater world? That was a mature secondary plane that the Salubo family had operated for 2,000 to 3,000 years. It was also the source of most of the family's profits. Under normal circumstances, non-core magi of the family could not be sent there. While they were shocked, Forgan and Wizard Kogan could not help but silently applaud this plan. The Deepwater world was a mystical world with water as its main element. Since Grimm was assigned to that place, he didn't dare to try to advance in rank due to the huge difference in his attribute. This way, delaying him for a few years would be a piece of cake. Once the thorn in the side, was removed, the remaining ants could naturally be dispersed and deployed in various ways, tearing apart the small forces in his camp. This way they would not be able to stick together. Even if Grimm successfully advanced in the future, the impact on the family would be much smaller. The more they thought about it, the more they felt that Lord Senazar's plan was extremely wise. The two magi couldn't help but reveal expressions of admiration. However, before the three of them could perfect this plan, a strange frog croak came from Wizard Forgan's body. Forgan was slightly taken aback, and then he took out a frog-like wizard tool from his bosom. At this moment, this wizard tool was flashing a red light rhythmically, and its cheeks puffed up as it croaked. "It's him. It's the spy I sent in." Wizard Forgan's expression changed, and he couldn't help but blurt out. As for who the spy Forgan sent in was, Senazar and Kogan had no idea. A rank 3 wizard wouldn't want to know, and a rank 1 Kogan had no right to know. The whole thing was done by Wizard Forgan. "Connect it." Senazar's voice suddenly turned cold. "If he's using an emergency spell to contact you in such a hurry, it seems like something has happened. Let me hear what he has to say as well." Wizard Forgan awkwardly nodded his head, and the power in his hand poured into the frog wizard tool. Immediately, he connected the emergency call from afar. "Bad news. Bad news. Lord Forgan, that Grimm snuck into the underground lava sea today, and he's already trying to break through to Grade 2. The voice from the wizard artifact sounded flustered and exasperated, clearly caught off guard by this news. As the three people in the hall heard this, they immediately froze, and their eyes began to sparkle. "Damn it, I've been tricked by that Grimm again," the three of them cursed in their hearts. Chapter 492. Blazing Flame Monarch Wizard Pagoda. There were no more than 3 Wizard Tower wizards who knew that Grimm had advanced to the next level. Just like before, today was still an ordinary day with nothing out of the ordinary. But at a certain moment, everyone suddenly received a message and rushed to the 4th level of the Wizard's Pagoda from their labs, residences and lecture halls. The 8 Wizard Tower wizards and the 12 resident wizards gathered in the Witchcraft Hall, which immediately filled up the place. Most of the wizards did not know what was going on, but they were stunned by the heavy atmosphere when they arrived. They immediately understood that something important was about to happen in the Wizard's Pagoda. The resident wizards were only guests, and naturally could not know what was happening in the upper echelons of the Wizard's Pagoda. Thus, they gathered together and discussed, asking each other about what might happen next. Some of the wizards who had lived here for many years and were more familiar with the Wizard Tower wizards secretly used wizard techniques to ask questions. Unfortunately, even though there were many wizards gathered here, only a few knew what was going on. A few of the Wizard Tower wizards looked at each other, then turned their gazes to the wizard Gargamel, who had convened the meeting. Gargamel's wrinkled face shriveled and he spread his hands. "Don't look at me. I only gathered everyone because I received a message from Lady Mary." The gazes of the crowd all landed on Mary, who was standing in a corner of the hall, picking at her nails. "Don't look at me either. I only informed Gargamel to gather all of you as per Grimm's instructions. I don't know anything else." Such irresponsible words immediately made all the sorcerers present angry. But a few of the people who knew what was going on could vaguely guess what was going on. They all lowered their heads, hiding their faces in the shadows of their hoods, unwilling to let others see their expressions. Mary was indifferent, Gargamel was frowning, Meryl was restless, and Sabrina had her arms crossed, silently looking at the people in the hall. The rest were either confused, stunned, or expressionless. No one spoke. Everyone shut their mouths, silently waiting for the outcome of the meeting. Suddenly, for no reason, the blazing flame monarch wizard's pagoda suddenly shook violently. An unfamiliar wave of mental energy suddenly appeared, quickly and stealthily scanning the bodies of the wizards. "There's an enemy! The wizard's pagoda is under attack. Let's go back and be on guard." The mysterious anomaly immediately caused the resident wizards to become restless. One by one, they took out their wands and gripped tightly onto their magic scrolls, vigilantly sensing the anomaly in the space. "Everyone, calm down. I have something to announce to everyone today." Suddenly, a loud voice that sounded like a fiery explosion came from the void. It was muffled, and although it was dull, it was extraordinarily loud. A few wizards were caught off guard, and had to cover their ears to resist the loud sound of the bell. Then, with a sharp tearing sound, a crack that was more than 2 meters long suddenly appeared in the void in the center of the hall, from which a blinding red light shot out. In front of everyone's eyes, a hole was torn in the originally tough space. Separated by a thin layer of energy light film, they could vaguely see the surging magma sea on the other side of the space. In front of the light film, a giant man of fire was trying hard to enter the wizard's pagoda through the crack. The giant man of fire stretched out a pair of large hands made of pure elemental flames and grabbed onto the edge of the uneven space crack. He forcefully pulled it to both sides, immediately widening the crack to the point where it could pass through. Thus, in the next moment, the body of the man of fire suddenly turned into a terrifying flame that could destroy the heavens and the earth, directly corroding the light film and appearing within the wizard's pagoda. This was a terrifying fire giant that was 7 meters tall when it stood up. If not for the fact that the wizard hall was built especially tall, it might not have been able to contain such a colossal creature within. As the light film broke, the terrifying heat immediately turned the wizard hall into a giant furnace. The wizards all felt the terrifying, suffocating wave of heat coming at them. The corners of their clothes that were not protected by spells immediately ignited with golden sparks, while the terrifying crimson flames forced them to retreat step by step. But they no longer cared, because an even more terrifying and massive enemy had appeared before them. Unexpectedly, after the giant man of fire entered the wizard's pagoda, he did not immediately start a massacre. Instead, he turned around and swiped his large hands of fire, using his terrifying power to heal the crack in the space. The raging sea of fire that was about to erupt was once again sealed back onto the other side of the light film. Then, with the injection of the wizard's pagoda's power, the broken space quickly mended. Oh, why does this fire giant have the authority to control the wizard's pagoda? A few quick-witted wizards immediately noticed this problem, while the rest of the resident wizards all hid at the edge of the hall. Their hands, hidden in their sleeves, tightly held onto escape scrolls or traction scrolls. They had already made up their minds to escape as soon as they saw that the situation was not good. This wizard's pagoda did not belong to them, and they would not risk their lives for some magical crystals. They could tell with a single look that this invading man of fire was not a kind soul. They could tell from the vast and terrifying ripples of energy that this was definitely a terrifying level 2 magical creature. Once the other party lost its temper, they might not be able to subdue it even if they gathered the power of all the wizards present. Thus, it was better for them to hide further away before the battle began. Just as the wizards were in a state of panic, Mary walked toward the giant man of fire with a relaxed expression, circling it twice. Even though Mary was tall, she only reached the height of the fire giant's thigh when she stood before it. The other party spread its arms, and a single finger was as thick as Mary's waist. Thus, when the fire giant stood there majestically, all of the wizards could not help but feel their bodies heat up, not daring to meet its scorching gaze that was as bright as the sun. After circling it twice, Mary could not hold back her curiosity, and could not help but extend her hand to touch the flames burning on the fire giant's thick thigh. With a soft sizzle, green smoke rose. Mary's extended right hand was scorched black by the flames protecting the body of the fire giant, causing her to cry out in pain. "What's going on? You still can't control the flames in your body?" Mary hurriedly retracted her right hand. Along with a burst of blood chi surging on it, Countless ashes fell off the hand that had been like charcoal just a moment ago, revealing the red and tender skin underneath. There's nothing I can do. The fire energy I absorbed this time was too much, and I'll need a few more days to completely digest it. The fire giant replied in a low, muffled voice. Teacher, is that you? You advanced to rank 2? Meryl excitedly took a few steps forward and asked incoherently. Teacher? Advanced? At this moment, if everyone still did not understand, they would not have the qualifications to be called knowledgeable and intelligent magi. All of the magi present could not help but hold their breaths, quietly waiting for the fire giant's reply. Meryl, I'm very lucky. I've advanced successfully this time. The fire giant let out a tsunami-like laughter towards the sky. However, he soon lowered his head to look at his huge body and sighed. I absorbed too much fire energy during the advancement ceremony. If I want to completely digest it and return to my original body, I'm afraid I'll need another 10 days to half a month. Grimm's fire giant form mumbled a lot more, but all the wizards chose to ignore it. Instead, they focused all their attention on the first sentence Grimm said. Succeeded. The owner of the Flame Monarch Wizard's Pagoda has become a rank 2 magus. This explosive news left everyone in a daze, their mouths agape and hands spread out. They could only stare blankly at the tall fire giant. The path of a magus was extremely difficult. Honestly speaking, most of the magi present had no hope of crossing the threshold and advancing from a regular rank 1 magus to a high-ranked magus. In the middle of the night, they too had dreamed of such a glorious moment of victory. However, the calm minds of the magi repeatedly reminded them that it was just a beautiful dream. To them, being able to sense the aura of a rank 2 magus at such a close distance was already very rare. But now they were witnessing the rise of a powerful rank 2 magus with their own eyes. If they remembered correctly, the owner of the Wizard's Pagoda, the legendary fire demon, had only advanced to become a magus less than 100 years ago. With such a frightening speed, Lord Grimm had proven that he possessed a frightening talent and great potential that far surpassed ordinary people. At this rate, reaching level 3 and level 4 wasn't that far away. The more the magi thought about it, the more excited they became. They could not help but look at the fire giant with a trace of admiration. Ever since they had become magi, they had become the favored children of the plane. However, they knew in their hearts that they were just some marginal figures in the huge sorcerer community. No one would really pay attention to them and care about them. This terrifying reality had nurtured their arrogant, extreme, twisted, and resentful attitude. With such emotions, the only thing that could subdue them in this world was absolute power and profound knowledge. The only thing that could subdue them was the respect and admiration they had for the strong. They might not be willing to follow a rank 2 magus and act like a lackey. However, if they could follow a powerful future great magus, they would be more than happy to do so. Unlike the resident magi, Mary and the rest of the tower magi could not help but gather around Grimm. They closed their eyes and silently sensed the powerful soul ripples that were unique to a rank 2 magus. Grimm had just advanced and his mental strength had not completely stabilized, which was why his soul aura was leaking out. This was a rare opportunity that would only come once in a lifetime. If Grimm was given half a month's time, it would be impossible for them to investigate the secrets of a rank 2 magus. The resident magi could only look on enviously from afar. None of them dared to imitate the tower magi and get close to Grimm. After all, any rank 2 magus would not allow an outsider to probe their secrets so brazenly. Even if they were not a threat to them, they would not allow it. In fact, even from afar, the group of resident magi could faintly sense Grimm's terrifying mental strength ripples, as well as the strange aura that they could not describe. It was the smell of laws. Compared to them, the aura of laws on a rank 2 magus was undoubtedly stronger. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.